Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming. You look pretty good for an old fart.
Well, first time I've done makeup for radio. Old fart is...
Oh, I forgot. You're not an old fart. You're...
an old fuck.
Yeah, right.
I'm an old fuck. It's kind of like a fat fuck, tall fuck, the skinny fuck, short fuck, you know. So it's not old man, it's not old fart, which is kind of like... It's old fuck, you know. In this respect, fuck is a synonym for the word fellow.
Well, you look pretty good for an old fellow.
Well, I feel pretty good for a 69-year-old guy. Yep.
Now, 50 years in show business, when I was doing some research, I thought, how often do you speak to somebody who's worked with Ed Sullivan and Keanu Reeves? That's quite a...
Yeah.
Who's more fun, by the way?
Keanu is really fun on the set with Alex Winter. I was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with the two of them, and then the sequel, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Right.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. They're very strange, but you know, well, they would never calm down until they call for action on a shot. They would clown and kid around and play grab ass and everything right up until the last second, and then it would be like and action, and suddenly they would be in the scene. And it threw me because I was trying to be an actor, you know. I was trying to be serious about what I had to do.
Right.
And I'd have to just stand there and kind of like keep my mind on my first line, you know, because I'm not a trained actor.
Well, we'll talk about your movie career, and we're going to invite
Such
people...
as it is.
Yes. Invite people up for questions throughout
Good.
this whole thing.
Good.
But I do want to go back to what started this whole thing.
Right.
You were born in New York.
That started it.
Now, your mother made a rather important decision when you were just a baby to
Leave
raise...
my dad?
Yeah.
He was a drinker, and he was a very successful advertising salesman in newspapers, selling space. And he was an accomplished public speaker, after dinner speaker they called him. And he was a drinker and a bit of a bully. He never did beat her or touch her or anything like that, but he kind of terrorized her and was abusive to my brother. So she didn't want that happening to me. And when I was 2 months old and my brother was 5 years old, she took us out the fire escape window in her father's apartment in New York. I in her arms and my brother at her hand, down the fire escape into the backyard, through the backyards out to Broadway, and into my uncle's Packard, and drove us off to the country, and she never looked back. Then she got back into business in advertising and raised 2 boys during the Depression and the Second World War. So she did quite a job.
Your mom's been quite an influence on you, hasn't she?
Yeah, well, she was the sole parent, of course, and she was absent because she had to work. So I did a lot of parenting to myself. I engaged in a lot of mental activity to kind of fill the void which children will do, and I had radio to listen to. She was very conscious of language, as was her father. Her father, a New York City policeman, my grandpa, whom I never knew. I never knew any of the grandparents. I never knew my father either. I had the one parent in my experience. And my grandfather was a cop in New York, 20 years, around, way back, because they were all rather old when their kids were born. So as a result, this was in the 1890s. And, he wrote out, my grandfather, many of the works of Shakespeare longhand during his lifetime because of the joy it gave him. That was the explanation he had. Wow. So that's an indication of the language gene at work. And my mother inherited that. The Irish have that to a great degree. Some do, some don't. But it's kind of a generalization, but it's true. It's an Irish trait, language. And gift of gab. My father had it, my mother had it. So it was natural for me to have that, and then she reinforced it. These things have to be reinforced as well. And she reinforced it in me.
Now, your brother, Patrick, was 5 years older than you.
Patrick, yes.
Usually when you have a brother 5 years older, you usually become the punching bag.
No.
How did
He was too
handle?
busy out getting laid and fighting and drinking. He didn't want to bother with that. He didn't have time for bullying, and it's not in his nature, really. You know what he told me? He said, "I was so glad when you came home from the hospital." He says, "I was so curious about you, and I used to watch you in the crib, you know." And so he has a wonderful, wonderful nature, but he inherited, I think, also my father's temper. So he was more of a fighter than I was. He was a physical guy, you know, in the bars and on the street corners. But I wasn't really of that type.
You, in fact, used one of Patrick's jokes last night on stage.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's still alive, of course, up in Woodstock. He said something that I wrote down a long time ago, and I just started saying it recently. He said, what we should do is take all the mentally defective people in this country and give them government jobs and just sit back and watch things improve. He's a pretty funny guy and very verbal, very, very verbal. More so than I even, I think.
You and him have a sort of a same perspective on things, don't you?
Pat and I,
yeah.
You know, we both, for the most part, think this experiment was nice while it lasted, and we're not too impressed with the human species. We were street corner guys.
Speaking of street corner, you hung around Morningside Heights.
Morningside Heights.
But you had a different name for it.
Well, they called it Morningside Heights Columbia University because of political reasons of their own. We lived in what we called White Harlem. It was the west side of Harlem. It was technically, in a manner of speaking, the white area of West Harlem. We had Cuban, Puerto Rican, a lot of Dominican, great number of Dominicans in Manhattan now, and Black Harlem, of course. So we lived in a kind of a mixed area, especially as you got out from the Irish enclave. We lived in a little, I would call it an Irish enclave. One half of that street was white, and the other half of it was black. And there wasn't a lot of hostility. I mean, there were occasional things, and there were attitudes probably that people held privately. I don't know. I never had that in my household. I never had those words and those attitudes expressed. So I didn't have them.
Well, the people in that area, your childhood certainly impressed you. You shared them with all of us. Father Rivera, was he really that lenient? You could actually see the line move at confession.
Yeah. Father, we had about 6 priests in the parish. Father Kelly, Father Ford was the pastor, Father Russell, Father Smith, and some of them came and went, and I don't remember the names. Father Daly and Father Halpern and Father Rivera, who was there primarily because there was starting to be more of a Spanish representation. I don't use words like Latino and Hispanic. I say what we grew up with. They're Spanish people, you know, Spanish heritage. Somewhere in their mixed blood, there's Spain. So I call them Spanish people. Father Rivera was there to serve them, and Father Rivera didn't understand. I mean, he understood English, but he didn't sound like he understood English. and we would go to Father Rivera because he was notoriously, or that's probably not the right word, he was famously more lenient. He didn't question you. Some of the priests, you know, they would question, so how did you touch yourself? How did you touch yourself, son? He didn't go into any of that, how I touched myself.
No, you just started...
You know, he didn't want that.
You just started doing a voice. You used to sit around with a tape recorder and record these voices, didn't you?
Well, this was a turning point in my life, and it's one that people should know about. When I was a young boy, I was a mimic, and I could imitate people in the neighborhood, authority figures, teachers, shop owners, other parents, cops on the beat, and people on television. Yeah, I could do little imitations. They were largely imitations of other people doing imitations. That's how you learn to do Jimmy Cagney. You see another guy do it on stage, and you say, oh, okay, and you copy him. This got me the attention of adults, because don't forget, I was alone in that house most of the day. When I wasn't in school, I came home and I was alone. I got the attention of these adults, and I got their approval through their laughter. They were more or less saying, good boy, George, good going, way to go. Yes, he's good, he's cute. Ain't I cute, ain't I clever? That's what this job is. So as a youngster, I wanted to be a comedian. I was probably only 8 or 9 or 10 years old when I began to form an idea that I wanted to be in the movies like Danny Kaye and like Red Skelton, and I called that being an actor, but it was actually being a comedian. And pretty soon I found out the word comedian, and I wanted to be a comedian. And when I graduated from 8th grade, The last thing I graduated from, by the way. My mother asked me what I wanted, and one of the brothers at school, Brother Conrad, had told us that he can get a clergyman's discount on cameras. So I asked him if he could get a clergyman's discount on tape recorders. I bought this big Webcor, long story, and I'm keeping it long, that I used it to do voices and do little sketches and skits and fake radio shows and fake newscasts and commercials. And I used it to more or less train myself for the thing I wanted to do. My mother was very progressive to have bought me that as a graduation present. I mean, she was a far thinker to see that in me and go ahead and foster that and reward that. Even though she didn't want me to follow it, but she knew it was a healthy thing for me to be doing.
You've always been a planner.
Yeah,
you had this optimistic
Georgie plans, they call me.
Yeah, this optimistic attitude that if you planned it well enough and you meant well, it's going to happen. You believe that?
Well, I would only plan things I felt, that obviously that I wanted and thought I was qualified for. But this is the good example of this career planning. When I was a kid, I said, well, first I'll be, I wanted to be an actor. I called it actor because I saw them in the movies and I knew they were movie actors. So Danny Kaye and these guys, I thought actor. Okay, so first I'll be a stand-up comedian. And don't forget, when I was a kid, the only place stand-up comedians worked was nightclubs. Right. Those kind of really more or less sophisticated places where you saw in the movies, and people danced, and there was a singer, and there was a comic, and I never got into those places. I was too young, and it wasn't in my world. So I knew about comedians from radio and from television later, but movies when I was a youngster. So I aimed at that, and I thought, well, the way to get there would be to first get into radio. That would be my first move, because then I could practice using my voice and I could learn to speak and do a lot of these things without an audience directly in front of me, which is the usual thing in radio. They're not sitting in the studio. And therefore I wouldn't be as nervous or afraid, and I could become a comedian, because by then there were further venues for comedians. I thought, then I can be a stand-up comedian, and then I can go, then if I'm really good at that, then they have to let me in the movies. And that was the way I looked at it. They had to let me in the movies. And that was the plan, and it became more sophisticated as I went through 13, 14, 15 years and out it.
Now, you actually revealed your life's plan in, what, you 11 years old?
Yeah, when I was 11, was 5th grade, Sister Nina, and I saw her, by the way, just about 3 or 4 years ago. She came to a show of mine up in Wisconsin. Yeah, she was 81, sharp as can be. 5th grade, Sister Nina, I used to sing at the club meeting. They had once a week, they'd have a club meeting, and there'd be new business and old business and all that kind of stuff. And then there'd be the entertainment. You could do an imitation, you could bring in your banjo, play the piano, sing a song. I would always stand up and sing a song. I sang Mañana in her class. Mañana, mañana, mañana is soon enough for me. And, some of the guys thought it was goofy, and some of them liked it. But in Sister Nina's class, we were assigned to write an autobiography. I think 5th grade is about time to look back on your life. So, part of the autobiography was the last page, and that page was what I'm going to be. And I said, I want to be either actor, comedian, imitator, announcer, or something like that. So there it was, right in front of everyone. And there was a nice amalgam. You can tell the thing I wanted most was attention. That was really that sentence all about, A&Q like me.
Well, you went to the Army.
Air Force, yeah.
Air Force, sorry.
And I wanted to be this announcer. My plan was to go in the Air Force, do 4 years from 17 to 21, get out at the age of 21, and use the GI Bill to go to school to learn to be an announcer and a disc jockey, so that I would be learning when I was 21. Now, I got in there, and when I was 18, I was in an amateur play downtown in Shreveport, in a very good community theater company, by the way, Shreveport Little Theater. And I was doing, and it was Monroe. And Joe Monroe was famous as a radio personality in Shreveport. I was out on the base. I was in the Air Force out on the base. And in my off time, I would do this play. And Joe was a famous radio personality. He did the morning show. He did the afternoon drive time. And I didn't know he owned the station. But so it was a really great station, KJOE, K-J-O-E in Shreveport.
That wasn't a clue?
Yeah, well, you know, there was a slight inkling in my mind, but I didn't know that he was the outright owner. Actually, he was 51%. That station was number one in a 9-station market, in spite of the fact that it was a daytime-only station. They had to come on the air every morning again at sunrise, turn the transmitter on, and gain back all the listeners who had tuned out at sundown. There are some stations of low power. This was a 1,000 watts, and daytime only, but it was number one, and it had about a 50% share of the market. But the way the mechanics of the thing happened, I was in this play, and Joe Monroe was in it, so I said to Joe, I said, hey, Joe, I wonder if I could come down and watch you do your radio show, because I'm going to be a disc jockey when I get out of the Air Force. And that was my first step, being on the risk, so I didn't bother telling about comedian and all that. I'm going to be a disc jockey, and I'd like to watch your show and pick up some tips and see how you do it. He said, yeah. He says, come on down. I still didn't know he was the owner. I got there and watched his show, and he went off the air at sundown. Let's say it was 6:15 that night. It changes. It gets later and later as the summer goes on. And when the show was over and the station was off the air, he said, go on in the control room there. I'll stay here at the board. Go in the control room there and the announcer's booth room and read some of this news copy and read a couple of these local commercials. So I brought him in there and I read them in my best assumed announcer voice. I was 18. I still had my New York, I guess. Well, I had a non-regional accent that I had been kind of cultivating since I had the tape recorder, but it wasn't perfect. I still had some New York vowels that gave me away. But I read for him, and he liked it well enough that he gave me a job on the spot, starting me at, it was 60 cents an hour, which he knew cheap labor when he saw it. 60 cents, but I forgot, I was in the Air Force. I was eating free and sleeping free and getting a little money too. So it was fine with me. I would have worked free, obviously. The job was weekends only, Saturday and Sunday, reading the newscast, the ones that were not sponsored. The sustaining newscast. It was either for the U.S. bonds or join the Navy or some kind of, drive carefully, those kind of things. So I learned the weekends reading those newscasts, how to read on the air and everything. And pretty soon, like a spot where they played nicer music. It wasn't top 40. They played kind of like nice music, musician actually. That's how it all began for me. I saved all that time. When I got out of the Air Force, and I got kicked out a year early.
I was going to say, you keep saying when I got out of the Air Force, but the fact is, you were kicked out of 3 high schools.
That's right.
Kicked out of choir, kicked out of summer camp.
Altar Boys, summer camp,
Altar Boys,
and Boy Scouts.
And
that's called...
and the Air Force.
That's called the hat trick.
Now, what was the terminology the Air Force used?
The Air Force discharge? That was, it was a general discharge under honorable conditions. It wasn't a BCD, a bad conduct, and it wasn't a dishonorable. So I got all my pay and allowances. But they let me out early because they were looking to cut manpower, and they looked in the areas of people who were being less productive than others. And I had stopped. I was in a very elite maintenance squadron. We had to have the highest IQs going into the Air Force of anyone to get into K systems. We ran and maintained the bomb navigation system. They were analog computers and radar systems and optics. We repaired them, and that was a very advanced system that was in the Boeing 747, which was the medium bomber. And I got out of the maintenance area. Once I got the job in the Air Force, they thought, well, that's pretty good. We got a guy doing kind of public relations for the base. This is good for the Air Force base to have a guy who's being productive and not just knocking up local girls, So I got out of my career field, as they call it, and because I was not productive in their minds, and so I could get out 11 months early. And I got out at 20, and at 20 I had my GI Bill of Rights, and I had 3 years experience in the field I wanted, and I had beat the game.
Very good.
Yes. It was a good start. It was a great start. It let me know that, man, you can make some breaks for yourself.
And the next stop was KXOL, and you met in Fort Worth. Right?
I met Jack Burns in Boston on radio up there, but I wasn't suited for that station. It was a network station with soap operas and stuff, and I went up there because you always want to get to a bigger market. When you're in radio, the first thing you do is you start recording your voice. You start taping to make your tape. You start making your audition tape so you can get to a bigger market. There's more money, more exposures, you can move on. It's a farm system, you know. So I wanted to get to Boston. I thought, well, I'll go to that station. I had a friend who got me in there. The guy was in the sales department. And I figured, well, I can make a base there, and I can look around Boston for a top 40 station to go to. But it never worked out. But I met Jack Burns there. We roomed together with a third guy, Ron, and I got kicked out of there for taking the news unit, the mobile news unit, from Boston to New York on the weekend just to buy some grass. Right. That was what I did. So, you know, once the twig is bent, you know, so grows the tree. And there I was. Well,
wait a minute. You didn't go there because the pot was so good in New York. You didn't know anybody in Boston, right?
I didn't know anybody in Boston, and I wanted to be with my buddies down in New York.
Right.
So we were 5 of us driving all through Harlem looking for grass because we knew where to go. 135th Street was the stop. We had certain stops we could make to buy grass, and we're driving around in this thing with, it says on the outside, it says WEZE, NBC News, you know, and we're looking for grass, and we're all like guys, you know, in our early 20s. So it was a lot of fun. But got fired from there, was out of a job for a while, and then I got called down to Fort Worth, where another guy from radio in Shreveport had moved on, a sales director, and he wanted me for their station in Fort Worth, so he brought me down there. So #1 station, I got the homework shift, 7 to midnight, answered my own phones, took all my own requests and dedications, and suddenly one day Jack Burns showed up from Boston. He says, I'm going out to give Hollywood one last chance at me. That was his attitude, which is the way to look at things. And his tires were bald, so luckily a news job had opened that day, and he got that job, and he was my nighttime newsman. And you know the rest. We went down to an after-hours comedy joint, which was really a coffee house called The Cellar in Fort Worth. And we did impromptu sketches every night, impromptu skits and two-man stuff. And it was so successful, we left radio. We said, screw this. You know, we had great jobs. We were making like $300, $400 a week. It's 1960, and we're in Fort Worth, a good market. And we could have gone on from there, but we decided to quit radio because we'll go to Hollywood and become stars. Because we have this filthy act that we did. Filthy. It was just, and in those days, filthy comedy didn't have a market for it at all. And there we were, how naive, but how wonderful when you're in that age period, to just get in my newly bought Dodge Dart Pioneer with the tinted windows and the AM/FM radio, and drive to Los Angeles on spec, you know, on speculation. We had about $300, and we got lucky out there. We got lucky. I got lucky every time I turned around.
Well, when you went out there, you got a job at a club.
Yeah, no, what happened was this. First, we went out there, and we were looking to see how we could get into show business. We knew we had this act we had written, and in the daytime we'd write stuff and learn it. Terrible. So we would go to places and look at other people, and we would hang around Dino's on the Strip and figure Frank Sinatra might come in. We hung around the Brown Derby one night, and Rock Hudson came floating through, and we were just using up our money. And one day we went back to the apartment, and the rest of our money had been stolen out of the sock drawer. Good hiding place, George. And we had no money. So we thought, well, gee, we hadn't counted on that. And we had vowed not to work, just to go straight into show business. We didn't want jobs, none of that bellhop stuff, none of that car hop, none of that stuff. We won't go into radio out there. But what happened was the only thing we knew was radio. And the only thing we really felt we deserved was radio. The second biggest market in the country. I mean, it was sheer lunacy to expect to just get into that market. But we went around. We went first to KFWB, #1 in the market, top 40 station. And we didn't have tapes or anything. They didn't want us, you know. So we're walking along, and we see this radio station, KDAY. We walked in there, and that's where my star on the walk is now out in Hollywood.
Really?
I had them put it out in front of that radio station. It's kind of nice. We went in there, and they were looking for a morning comedy team. I mean, it's just all luck, you know. You just get lucky and you're on a roll. They were looking for guys like us. We did a tape for them. They loved us. They called us the Wright Brothers instead of by our real names. They called us the Wright Brothers. But it did a big publicity campaign, ads in Variety, full-color ads and everything, and put us on the air. And here we are on the air about, let's see, it would only have been about 2 months after we got there. And it was just sheer madness, you know. There we were.
That wasn't good enough for you.
No. What we did was still work on the act. We're going to work on the act because this is only a stepping stone, you know. And now we're making about $500 a week each, you know, and that's good, and we're great. But we're practicing this act after hours. This was also a daytime station, by the way. Even though it was at 50,000 watt and it had a big signal out on the West Coast, it was a daytimer. And we went off the air at sundown, and in the studio, we would work on these routines. We were getting serious now. And nearby, about 2 blocks away, was a coffee house. That was the way for us to get in. They were now coffee houses. It was the era of the beatniks. And coffee houses liked offbeat entertainment. And we knew we could get in there and do our stuff for the owner maybe and get a shot. Just get a hootenanny shot. Get a single shot, you know. And we went over there. He liked us and he hired us for 2 weeks. We're still rehearsing our act. And a guy came walking through the studio because it was an office building and you could see the studios on your left and there were little offices here. He was a song plugger. He was a guy who used to do PR for songwriters and stuff and record labels. And he saw us and he used to be the road manager for Rowan and Martin. And he says, I think you guys could make it, you know. He became our manager. We went in this little coffee house. They held us over for 6 weeks. Lenny Bruce came in and saw us. Mort Saul came in and saw us. And based on that, Lenny Bruce, we got a contract with GAC, one of the biggest agencies in the country. They had New York offices, Chicago, and Beverly Hills offices. And we got into nightclubs where we quit radio again. We quit. We said, no, sorry about that. We've got something to do. And we went on and began a career that worked out very well. 2 years together. We were on The Tonight Show with Jack Parr that October. We drove out of Shreveport in March. We drove out of Shreveport in March, and that October we were on NBC television at night on the biggest show for a comedian. It's just stupid, you know. But, man, it can happen. It can happen, you know. Yeah, thank you.
I've heard the term luck of the Irish. Maybe it started with you.
I know it.
Jack Burns, by the way, if you're not old enough to remember, went on to do Burns and Shriver, who you may have seen on Ed Sullivan's show, doing their taxi cab routine.
Jack was the bigot in the back. That's the bigot in the back, and Avery was the cab. Yeah, well, you know, these commies out there, the commies, you know. He did that character very beautifully, and he had a good career. And he played Warren when Don Knotts retired from Mayberry RFD. He played Warren. He was the new deputy, and he's had a good career writing and producing things.
Now, you went on to become a solo act.
Yeah. Each of us wanted to eventually become soloists.
Ed Sullivan.
Yeah.
How in the world did that happen?
Well, that's a part of the process as you become known. This was the era of variety television. And there were 2 important syndicated TV shows at that time. Merv Griffin and had a show. It was a 90-minute nighttime show, and it was syndicated as opposed to being on a network. And so was Mike Douglas. Mike Douglas had a daytime show that was syndicated, both out of Westinghouse Television. And I did about 15 Merv Griffins, and I did about 15 Mike Douglases. By the time the networks noticed me, the producers for the network, the guy who produced the Jimmy Dean show, they got me on there, and I did a monologue on there, and then they kept me over, and I did another monologue the next week, and there I was on ABC television. And from there, those same producers did a summertime show the next year. It took Andy Williams' place on the Kraft Summer Music Hall, and we took his place during the summer, calling it the Summer Music Hall, with John Davidson. And I was the house comedian and the writer. And from there, that's when Ed Sullivan notices you, or the Carson people notice you, or Hollywood Palace, or whatever other variety show you were going to get on. There were a lot of variety shows then. Carol Burnett, you know, Jimmy Rogers, a lot of them.
Do you remember meeting Ed Sullivan the first time?
Oh, yeah. He was just what he looked like. He was, you know... But he took I held out. They wanted me on that show. Here I am, still now in my early developmental stage, although I was on national television a lot. And they wanted me on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I resisted because I had heard that they were very brutal with comedians about cutting their time at the last minute. You have 6 minutes, they come and tell you to cut a minute because the monkeys went long, Sorry, but the baboon went long, you're going to have to cut. So I didn't want that because I did set pieces. I didn't do a series of jokes that I could cut 5 of them out to take out a minute. I did a piece that I had memorized that was 6 minutes long, and that was it. And you couldn't take out anything. So I didn't want them going around doing that to me. That would usually happen, you have dress rehearsal in the afternoon, and then you would have the broadcast at night, live, 8 o'clock. And it would happen between dress and air, they would tell you to maybe cut a minute. And then between air, when they started at 8, and the time you went on, 8:40 or something maybe, they would come and tell you to take out 30 seconds more or something. So I didn't want that. I was fearful enough doing live television. So I finally gave in, and I wound up doing 11 Ed Sullivan shows. And I wound up really writing some very poor material. I mean, my standard really fell off because there you are, you're offered 2 more Sullivan shots, and the money is great, and the exposure is important, and you want to do that. So by then I had my beard, and I had begun to grow my hair, and I had stopped wearing a jacket. It was more of a vest look. It wasn't kind of like street clothes. They were a little nicer, but they were nonetheless a shirt and a vest, And at that point, he always accommodated. They always accommodated the change. Elvis Presley was on there, and the Beatles, and the Stones, and they always, they still did an opera singer. They still did people juggling plates.
Popo Gigio.
They told me I had a choice between 2 jokes. At dress rehearsal, I did, among other jokes, I did 2 jokes that were topical. And one of them was about Governor George Wallace of Alabama, who was running for president and was a racist and a segregationist. And he had a favorite saying. He would always talk about the liberals by referring to the pointy-headed intellectuals. He called them pointy-headed intellectuals up there in Washington. Talking about George Wallace, I said, you talk about pointy heads. Have you ever seen the sheets those people put over their So that was one joke. That was one joke in the monologue. Another joke in the monologue was about Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was the champ at that time. His name was still Cassius Clay. And he was the champion of the world. And they took away his championship because he wouldn't go to Vietnam. He refused to go. And he was, of course, right to do that. Now, what I said about it was this. They told him, no more, sorry, you can't, no more boxing, because you won't go and do your thing in Vietnam. So I said it this way. I said, Muhammad Ali, his job was beating people up. That was his job, beating people up. They wanted him to go overseas and kill people. And he said, no, I don't want to kill people. I'd rather just beat them up. And they said, all right, well, if you won't go and kill people, we're not going to let you beat them up. And they told me between dress and air, they said you can have this is the oddest censorship I ever experienced. They said you can have one of those jokes or the other, but not both. It was volume rather than, it was the strangest thing. So obviously I chose the Muhammad Ali joke, which is a far smarter joke, than the pointy head. And that was my memory of the last show I did. He went off the air. Actually, I did the second to last Ed Sullivan broadcast, although we didn't know it at the time.
You're into the 60s. Mm-hmm. You've been getting high since you were, 14?
Yeah, 13.
And you were going through, sorry.
These things are important.
That year does make a big difference.
That's right.
But when you're doing drugs and whatnot, it's not always conducive to productivity.
Yeah, once you get to something that you can't put down.
Right.
The beer and the pot, my lifelong buzz was beer and pot. You can put that down. You can regulate that. You can say, okay, well, today I have to do this. I'll just have about 2 beers in the morning and smoke a half a joint, and then I'll do that, and then I'll get high. But when you get to things like cocaine or any of the other ones we all know, and you get to the addictive drugs, it's a different story. And that's what happened in the early 70s, once I had started my record career.
One of the fallout things that happened as a result was Carson. He sort of distanced himself from you when you're going through this change.
Well, when I went through these changes, my appearance, my hair got longer, my beard grew, and my clothing became closer to the, I guess you'd call it the hippie ideal, And now some people in show business, some old, the old-timer, not old-timers, but the old-school people, they thought that I was making a very crass decision to, as I heard it from one guy, to cash in on the hippie thing. That was their way of looking at this from the outside. They weren't attuned to the kind of, pot is a value-changing drug. It's a hallucinogen. It's a mild hallucinogen like acid, and it's a value changer. And if you smoke from the time you're 13 till the time you're 30, you have formed certain attitudes, and it just reinforced my malcontent, my outsidership, the feeling of being outside and not belonging. So these people had never had that, so they couldn't see that there might be some integrity in what was happening to me, and they thought, well, he's just trying to cash in. Don't worry about it. They'll see through him, and he
thought you were doing a Bobby Darin. With
just going to the mountain and coming back. I am different, and it wasn't that. It took 2 years for this change to take place physically with the growth of the beard and the hair, and I did it on television. There were syndicated shows I was doing by that time. Virginia Graham had a 5-day-a-week show. Della Reese had a 5-day, and so did Steve Allen. And on these shows in this change period, I would explain what it was, that I don't belong in nightclubs. I belong on the colleges. I belong on the campuses. The beard would get longer, the hair would get longer, and by the time 2 years was up, I was there. But in the meantime, regular show business, which I cared very little about, but Johnny Carson was important. That was another platform that I wanted to show my kind of like new self. And they got afraid when they heard about it, because they thought, oh, he's on the acid, and they don't know what you're going to do. And I came in to see Johnny. I asked to come over because I wanted to present my case. But I was full of coke, and I was real speedy, I was getting my seat over, and probably my legs were going like this, and everything. I don't know. And I had a tie-dye shirt that was really garish and bizarre looking, And that just confirmed what they thought. They thought, oh, fucking Christ, look at this, So I had to fight my way out of that by being accepted in the place I said I would be, which was, younger, I'll call it a more youth-oriented culture,
Well, Johnny obviously knows talent, because you ended up coming back and hosting. You filled in as guest host. How many times?
I don't know. It must have been 20 times I guest host. I've done 140 of those shows, counting Jay Leno, starting with Jack Parr.
Did you enjoy co-hosting? Was that too straight for you?
No, it was. I enjoyed the status that it gave me, and the exposure to talk about whatever other things I wanted to talk about. But it wasn't coming. And I was loaded on coke on a lot of those shows that I co-host. I did one show when I was loaded, and David Carradine was one of the guests. All right? I believe he was on acid that night. I only just say I believe that. I've never asked him. He came out in one of these, he was in that Far Eastern, that period.
Kung Fu thing.
Yeah, well, this was more like Far Eastern. It was kind of a diaphanous, sort of a flowing white garment, And he came out, and he was sitting there on the couch with his legs in the crossed position up on the couch. And I could swear to this day that each time I asked him a question, that he was answering the next one. Yeah. That's how fucked up I was. And you do have a list of the questions, so you kind of know what's next, because you do rehearse what you're going to ask. But I don't know how that would be possible, but it seemed like he was doing that. I wonder if there's anyone out in eBay land who has an old copy of that for some odd reason. I have a lot of old stuff.
Can you imagine Mr. and Mrs. America laying in bed watching?
Yeah.
And you guys are on. By the way, speaking of being coked up, the very first Saturday Night Live, you were the host.
Coked all week.
And did they have to bang on your door and get you to come
They
to
say they
rehearsal?
did. It's been said to me. I believe it, because you do lock all the bolts and things and shit when you're getting real paranoid, Yeah, I had great coke too, and I did it all week, and I didn't like what I did on the show, and I was afraid to do sketches. I didn't want it. I told Lauren the first day, I said, don't put me in sketches. I'm not good at that. I really didn't feel very confident about acting ability, and I didn't know sketch acting is different from acting, so I didn't make that accommodation in my mind. So I just said, leave me out of everything, just let me do little spots. Let me do little monologues, 30 seconds, a minute and a half, 2 minutes here, and all through the show. I can see myself grinding my teeth on that first broadcast. If you ever see the DVD, watch for the guy grinding his teeth and catching his breath, kind of like,
You did a couple of movies. You did Car Wash with Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
You and Richard had worked together, though, before.
Richard Pryor was in the same state I was. Richard Pryor was still an unknown comedian who hadn't done any television. And he was in his inoffensive period. He was in his doing Rumpelstiltskin. He did a little, there was a famous Richard Pryor early piece called Rumpelstiltskin. That's what got him on the Merv Griffin show. He was down there working out. We would smoke some joints up there in the high staircase in the basement of this place. The people came in to see Richard Pryor one night from Merv Griffin, and they gave him an interview the next week. So he got his interview. And then I'm still laboring there, and he gets a show from them, and he goes and does the show. Well, by the time he got the show, in between his interview and the show, I had gotten my interview. But then he had his show. So I was one step behind him. So then he got his second show, then I passed my interview, and I got my first show. So the two of us grew out of that room into this syndicated television exposure, which was nationwide and was always watched by the networks. And that was how the two of us sprung to life.
Well, one of the good things about the 70s, you released those albums that most people hear on XM Comedy all the time. FM and AM, Class Clown, Occupation Fool, yeah. Toledo Window Box.
Yes. Those were 4 gold albums. I had 4 gold albums in a row, 72, 3, 4, and 5. And then I had a couple after that weren't gold. That was what I call the Little David years, Little David Records, right. Owned by Flip Wilson and his manager, who then became my manager, and I was signed to the label. And, that was the thing. You see, you need a way, if you're going to do, quote-unquote, material that should be uncensored. I hate this designation, adult, or X-rated or something. But if you're going to do realistic spoken word art, if you're going to get a mass audience, you need a medium. And the medium at that time was records.
Right.
You certainly couldn't do it on television. That was commercial, and they didn't allow that kind of language or those ideas if it was just the ideas that were dangerous to them. So I got my mass audience through the records. The records fed the box office at the college concerts. The college concerts fed the record sales, and it went around. Plus, you do some television and talk about both. I'll be in Buffalo, I'll be in Toronto, and I'll be in Niagara Falls. And by the way, FM and AM, but you did it a little more gracefully than that. So the whole thing worked. And then I ran out of record career. You can't be the hot new guy in town forever.
Right.
You can't be the fastest gun, because a faster gun is coming to town in a few years. So my record career began to kind of wane in the 70s, as did the counterculture. The disco came into play, and the people who are the true hippies and the true radicals, they kind of retreated to the hills, and the other ones went and got MBAs and stuff like that. And there I was, sort of not knowing who I was and who I should become, to be true to myself. So I drifted a while, and that's when cable started. That's when HBO started at 75 or 76, and I got on there in 77. And now I've done 13 of them. That's my way of reaching the mass audience.
Right. It was the first one was George Carlin, 77. George Carlin again, 78. Mm-hmm. Carlin at Carnegie Hall, 82. Carlin on Campus, 84. Yep. Playing with Your Head, 86. What Am I Doing in New Jersey?
88.
1988. Doing It Again, 1990. Jamming in New York was 92. Did that 40 Years of Comedy special. In 96, Back in Town. You Are All Diseased in 99. Complaints. That got a lot of complaints and grievances in 2001, and Life is Worth Losing in 2005.
Right.
I've been told that the Jammin' in New York was a special one for you.
Well, it was, you know, I'm an entertainer because I work in an entertainment circuit. But there's an artist at work, too. Not all entertainers are artists. Some are just entertainers, and they kind of experience life, their creative lives in a static way. They get to a certain place, and they kind of stay there. Other people who have an artistic element or component grow, because artists always grow and go somewhere. Artists are on a journey. They don't know where it is going. They don't know. They don't want to know. They just know there's something else, there's something more, there's more in me, there's more to talk about, there's more to look at. A painter, a composer, they grow, they live, they grow. It's an ongoing thing. So that is true for me as a writer. That's the artistic part of me, as the writer. So the artist goes through phases and changes. I found my comic voice as a younger person, and then that comic voice lasted until the late 60s, early 70s, when I made that change to the countercultural type material. That was a paradigm shift, and that was a change in voice, the comic voice and the writer voice. And then and then through the 70s, I developed that, and then I kind of lost track of what would be next, and I didn't know. I kind of drifted, and I was grasping. Then in '92, even though I did these HBO shows, and they were plenty good, I like them. I still would stand behind every word of them, but there wasn't a new voice yet. There was just like an improved voice that was ongoing. In 1992, I discovered silence on the stage. I discovered that you could have long periods of silence. The show I did, Jammin' in New York, had a long, more or less serious piece called "The Planet is Fine, the People are Fucked." And it was about the fact that the planet will outlive us. Don't worry about the planet. People who tell you they're worried about the planet are not. They're worried about themselves and their habitat. They want a clean place to live. And that's fine. But don't be talking about how you're going to save the planet. You're not. The planet will outlive you, and it will heal itself. And that piece was very thoughtful and very interesting, and I loved it. But I had to learn that there were times in the show when it was okay not to get laughs. And that was another important shift for me that is still playing out.
Plus, it was the first live one.
It was the first live one. It was New York City. It was the first one done in New York City for me. I did it at Madison Square Garden, not in the big arena, but in the theater there that holds about 6,500. So it was a big audience. It was live, and it was my hometown. And I was king of that town for a night, you know. It really felt good. I looked out my hotel window that night, and I thought, yeah, you know, this is my town. One of those kind of scenes you'd see in a movie, kind of a cheesy scene. You know?
Sort of an adult version of when your mother's friends used to pat you on the head and go.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was just a graduated version.
I still haven't covered books or movies, but I promised to let people ask questions.
Good,
I'm going on and on.
Questions.
Are there anyone here that wants to step up and have a question? Anybody?
Hi, my name is Alan.
Hi, Alan.
First of all, it's very rare that you get to meet somebody that is an idol of, you know, and
Thank you.
30 years ago, I was introduced to on that first HBO special that you talked about, and I just thank you for 30 years of
Thank you.
making me laugh.
That's very nice.
I'm curious about some of the comics that you've worked with. Who's the funniest that you look back at and you think, man, that guy is, you knew when you saw him that he was going to be as good as, you know, you've ever seen?
Well, the only one that comes to mind, I'm sure if I searched my memory or if I had a better memory, I'd have other examples. But Lewis Black was someone I saw early in his exposure, and I knew this was a unique and strong voice, to say the least. So Lewis Black, I love him. I love that theatricalized anger and the things he talks about. He's got a good mind. I like good minds. He's one that I think of. I never hung out with comics. I still don't. I'm a loner. I'm a real kind of loner and an outsider. I never hung out in comedy clubs, and of course I never worked in them, so I didn't need to hang out in them. But I was just never attracted to that. The comic culture, the comedians who like to hang out together. So I don't have a lot of knowledge. I didn't have a lot of occurrences of being able to see someone early, I'd say that. But Lewis Black was one that definitely sprang to mind.
Hi, my name's Chris.
Hi, Chris.
You've had the chance to see the entertainment industry evolve tremendously over your career.
Yeah.
And one thing that's I've heard said, and whether it's true or not, is that if you saw a lot of people who are icons today, such as yourself, if you started today the way the system is set up, you might not get the opportunities. You maybe never would have had the chance to become who you are.
That's right.
Do you think that's a fair assessment, or do you think the entertainment industry in general has improved or just changed or gotten worse over your career?
Well, depending on the individual, that's both true and not true. I would say with user-generated content and the viral quality of the internet, that a person who is self-made, let's use that for a shorthand, a person who wants to be self-made has some avenues that certainly I didn't. But on the other hand, life and the world and show business were simpler then, so it was easier to see where the path ought to be. I mean, there was only one way I was going to get started, and that was to get on a radio station, and in the midst of having that career going, to look around at places where I might have a chance to learn to be a stand-up. You know, there were some nightclubs and there were some coffee houses. So the world and the choices were limited, which was probably good for me. But I think if I had had the same tools genetically and had them reinforced as they were for me in this era, and I had these impulses to show myself off, I think I may have found a way, but God knows how different it may have been and how much longer it may have taken. It's a much more complicated place. I wouldn't want to come of age at this time. Although I see a lot of advantages in it that we didn't have. I see that and I understand that. But I'm very happy that I came of age in the period I did. You could kind of put your hands on all of it without much effort, you know. And now it's pretty elusive and pretty fragmented.
You didn't take the idea of being a movie star quite as seriously.
I wasn't an actor.
And you've done movies here and there, and you've done voices in animated films. Mm-hmm. You were the Volkswagen bus.
In Cars,
right.
Fillmore.
Yeah. But recently you played Ben Affleck's dad in Jersey Girl.
Yeah,
I
like that. Well, that was written for me, and I could show my sweet side, and a bit of irascibility. But there was a sweetness to the role. It was a grandfatherly role. It was written on a model of his father, and so it was kind of more suited for who I was at the time. The other thing I'm proud of having done, I did a Hallmark mini-series called Streets of Laredo, which was a continuation of Lonesome Dove. And it was the authentic continuation. There's an ersatz continuation that was kind of bogus, but this was the authentic one. And I did a part of an old scout, and I really felt good about that. And then Prince of Tides, I played the gay neighbor, Eddie, and I was really happy with the way that came out. But I wasn't really born to be an actor. If I had trained all my life, it would have been a different story. If I had learned technique and training, yes, but I didn't have the tools.
I'm Michael.
Hi, Mike.
Mr. Carlin, we know a lot of your comedy comes from things that really piss you off. What are some of the things that really piss you off that you haven't really talked about on stage lately?
Well, you catch me short because I don't have my computer at hand and I can't go look for a lot of stuff. I'm blessed with some pretty deep files. I think it's not so much what I'm angry about, because anger implies that you have a stake in the outcome, that you care. And I don't really care. I don't. I mean, it comes across as anger. You know, obviously there's a theatrical, there's a heightened kind of intensified theatrical anger that you need to convey these thoughts. But I'm not personally an angry man. I'm not personally angry about these things. I think they're wonderful because I root against the species. I finally came to a realization, and this freed me as a writer. This was part of that transformation in the 90s. I realized I didn't really care about this outcome on this planet. I didn't care what happened to the species. I think this is a species that was given great gifts and had great potential and squandered them. I think this species squandered them. I think it chose poor ways of organizing itself socially and politically. I think it made a wrong turn when it came to buying the okey-doke that the spiritual leaders gave, the high priests. We turned it over to the high priests and the traders. It's commerce and religion that have ruined and spoiled the potential of this species. And in this country, the same two things are true, but this country is writ large, and this country is the leader in the decay of the soul, if you will. Just I use that metaphorically. It's just, and I just don't care what happens to this country. I don't care. I don't give a fuck. So, and you know what? The only anger there is, and I recognize one in my voice there. You know what that is? It's really a reflection of disappointment and disillusionment and being let down by my species. You know, we had such great possibilities, and they're not being realized. They talk about poets and philosophers, and well, aren't there? Yes, there are. How much influence do they have? None. There are more people writing poetry in America than there are reading it. Imagine that. Well, I guess that's true in a lot of fields, but it's just, I think that's the anger. It's a frustration. It's a letdown. You know, it comes from, you know, how could you do it? That's why I usually always use the second person. You know, I talk about the audience and I say, how can you know what you did? You know, I don't say, you know what we did here in this country. I say, you know what you people did? I put it on them. It's not my problem. You know. So anyway, that's just a taste of what eats around the edges for me.
And if you don't know, if you want more of George's philosophy, the books, Brain Droppings, Napalm, Silly Putty, When Will Jesus Bring the Pork Chops?
Yeah.
And sometimes a little brain damage can help was actually originally a promotional item.
It was actually a magazine-size item to be sold at concerts, but I didn't. I wanted to put out some material in there, so I threw pictures in too, because you have to have pictures in it. It's kind of a pseudo book, quasi book.
So if you want to know more of the philosophy, he was just spewing.
Some of it is in there, yeah.
Yeah, right. Just read those books, because I always like to end on that note, but there's a couple of other questions. One of them that you don't like to be asked is, have you ever thought about when this is going to end, when you're going to retire?
Oh, no, I don't mind being asked that. No, it's like I say, the artist is never satisfied. If you're beginning to be satisfied, you know, something's wrong with you. If you pardon this highfalutin, you know, terminology, I'm talking about the artist part, you know. Pablo Casals, the great cellist, master of the cello of the last century, one of the outstanding musicians of the last century, he was in his 90s, and he was still doing a few recitals, and he would practice 3 hours a day. He practiced his cello 3 hours a day, and someone said to him at some point, they said, Master Casals, you know, you are a past master. You are the maestro. Why, at your age, do you bother practicing 3 hours a day? And he said, well, I'm beginning to notice some improvement. And that's the answer. I mean, why stop? You know, only if nature stops me. If I lose the ability to write or speak, some alteration in plans will be necessary. But I've already imagined, because they do have this for people who are totally paralyzed, that the movement of your eyes, you can look at a keyboard that's projected and you can type by moving your eyes to the letters. And they'll have that perfected by the time I'm paralyzed. I'm assuming that.
Well, to quote George Carlin, art doesn't have a finish line.
It's just a race, but against yourself, with no reward except the satisfaction of explaining yourself in some symbolic form or direct form. In my case, painting is more symbolic.
Would you leave us with what you would put on your gravestone? What's your epitaph supposed to read?
He was here just a minute ago.
Thank you. You're very kind. I'm so relieved I could fit in this fucking chair. That was the first thing. The moment I saw the chairs, I was like, am I going to fit in that one? So it's always a relief to come into the room, sit down, and be like, hey, there's some space.
You know, what's great is that, you know, you're not in the news right now, and you're not on Twitter. We haven't heard about you. Just really great to see that you're doing okay. And
I could fill you in on what's been going on since Cop Out, I guess. I haven't really been in the public eye that much. Yeah, it has been a weird year for me, sir. I didn't expect anything that kind of went down this year. And life throws you curveballs every once in a while, including, get off the plane, you fat fuck. And And, you know, you either sink or swim. Either you're just like, oh, my God, this is going to devastate me, or you find a way to kind of work through it. We like comedy, and we like to work through our issues with comedy, whether it be painful issues about ourselves, and obviously, like, weight has always been my Achilles heel and whatnot. Oh, you know, I always stand behind chairs, wear heavy clothing, lots of layers. I've always been a layers guy for that very reason. The moment somebody exposes that thing that you're totally terrified of, in the moment it happens, it's terrifying, it sucks, you sit there going, life will never be the same, I'm irrevocably changed, everyone knows I'm fat now. And then when I thought about it, I was like, everyone knew I was fat. Like, there's no story here. And then 3 days later, Tiger Woods got up and said, I cheated on my wife, and nobody cared about how fat I was. So I'll always hold a debt in my heart for Tiger Woods. A hell of a golfer. I don't like golf that much, but he saved my ass. You know, in a big bad way. But once that kind of got out of the way, like I was saying, you either go with it or fucking let it crush you. And I was just like, you know, so a bunch of people said, I'm going to fucking turn it around, do something else with it. And that's kind of what this year's been about.
And now, of course, the new controversy, everybody is talking about your new film that's coming out and the fact that you're doing this as a true independent. And for a lot of us that love those early 90s films,
yes, me included,
you're one of those guys that everybody went, okay, great, now I got somebody to be with. And people followed your career, along with people like Tarantino and Wes Anderson. We could go through a list of great guys.
I'm the less successful version of all those guys. Every one of them you list, like, even Wes. Wes found a way to make, and Wes's flicks are very, like, they're intelligentsia, they're impenetrable to people like Jason Mewes. Like, what's this about?
Right.
Where's the pussy? So, even a dude who makes those movies found a way to, like, break through, make $50, $70 million and stuff. And I've never been that. I've always been fortunate where the people who know my stuff know it and really dig it, but I never went above a certain level.
Right.
And for years, people would always be like, well, you got to go to that next level, dude. That's where it's at. Like, this is not the real party. The real party's up there.
Yeah.
And they push you to get to that level, but, like, after 17 years, like, I'm able to admit that I guess where no one else can, it's just like, there's never going to be another level for me. Like, I'll always have a very specific audience for a theatrical run of any movie I do. There's a reason we call it The View Askew. One for everybody.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, my mother, she don't like any of my movies except Jersey Girl. So, that tells the story right there. So, like, for me, like, those early flicks, the ones in the 90s, Clerks, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I talked about, like, I'm retiring from directing film and stuff. Hit somebody, the movie I make next is going to be the last one. And I came at people like, why? People get suspicious right away. Like, why are you leaving? What do you know? Is the Earth about to blow up? Are you on one of those planes, those Simpson planes that go to the other planet? And I'm just like, no, I just feel like I got into this game not to be a director so much as I wanted to tell stories. And the only way I knew how to tell stories was in the visual medium of film, which is weird because I'm not a visually oriented guy. I wanted to tell comic book stories first, but I knew I couldn't get hired at DC or Marvel because I wasn't British. They were hiring all British dudes at that point. So for me, I looked at film, and Richard Linklater just made Slacker, and I was like, ooh, there's a way in. Like, this dude in Bumblefuck Nowhere made this movie about kids that nobody's ever heard about. Turns out Bumblefuck Nowhere is Austin, Texas.
Right,
Everybody's heard about it. I hadn't. And at that point, it's a crucial part of the story. Thank God I didn't know that he lived in a major metropolitan area, the cultural center of the United States, because I wouldn't have then, I think, tried Clerks. Part of the reason I saw Slacker, and I'm like, this dude, he ain't from Hollywood and he ain't from New York, and he made this movie in the middle of nowhere, Texas, in a town nobody's ever heard of. Like, I could do that in Jersey. If I'd known that he was like, he's in like Texas's version of New York and L.A.,
right,
I probably would have been like, oh, well, that's why he did it. There's a film community there, and not pursued it. But just a little bit of ignorance was enough to kind of push me over the edge, where it was like, I could be that dude in Nowheresville, Texas, until people were like, that's Austin. I was like, oh, is that well known, this Austin? But at that point, let's see, it's coming up. August is going to be 20 years since the moment I sat in a theater downtown at the Angelica Film Center and watched Richard Linklater's Slacker. And afterwards, I'm driving home with my friend Vincent. And we got through the Holland Tunnel, but we didn't even get to the toll that takes you onto the Jersey Turnpike. Before I turned to him, and I was just like, let me give you a hand job. No, that's not what I said. That story gets really sexy at that point. Bring the lights down. I turned to him and I go, dude, I think I want to be a director. And he had always been into filmmaking, and I was always like, I'll write, but I can't imagine making film. But that dude kind of, like, he talked about it so much, made it seem like he was a normal guy from nowhere. My friend worked at the convenience store with me, who talked about doing this job that, like, seemed like only giants and legends and movie stars could ever touch. You'd have to be born into the manor to make a film, or born into an affluent Los Angeles family or something like that, or be born Marty Scorsese or something like that. Suddenly I realized that's not necessarily the case. Like, people can make movies if they're not from there, because of the indie film community. The indie film movement was booming at that point. Late 80s, early 90s. Soderbergh had done Sex, Lies, and Videotape. Quentin had done Reservoir Dogs. Robert, the year before me, Robert Rodriguez, had done El Mariachi.
Right.
So it was in the air. You know, you could kind of go like, all right, well, it's possible. I don't know if I'll make it, but that's the best way I think I'll ever get heard, is to try to make a film. It seemed kind of doable, and it happened. But I wasn't prepared for everything that came after. I literally wrote Clerks and Dogma, and Clerks was the movie that was meant to get Dogma financed. Like, basically, Clerks was a calling card movie meant to show people, this is what I could do if we had some money. And then, hopefully, they'd give me money to make the next movie. I wouldn't have to put it on my credit cards. What happened instead was the last 17 years, which has been an amazing fucking ride. And I've compared it to, in one of the podcasts, I said, imagine you love chocolate milk. And then you go down to the store, corner 7-Eleven, to go get some chocolate milk. You walk in the door, like, motherfucker, you just won a chocolataria. And you're like, what do you mean? They're like, we're giving you a whole milk factory. You're going to own all the cows, and you're going to have a chocolatizer, and you can make chocolate milk as much as you want, and you can vend it. I'm like, get out of here. Like, it's a business. Congratulations. And I did that for many years. And one day you're at the front office of Milk Co. and you're just like, all I wanted was a chocolate milk, you know. I've went on an amazing wild ride, but I always knew that it would end, because I always felt like I was never a director first and foremost. I was a guy that writes flicks, and he just happens to direct them so he can protect his material, keep all the stupid poop and dick jokes in there. So after time, I've been saying, even up early in 94, 95 in interviews and stuff around Clerks, Mallrats, I said, I don't think I've got more than 10 scripts in me. Like, honestly, I feel I got about 10 scripts, and then when I'm done with that, I think I'll just be finished. And I've kind of reached that point in my life. Like, after Zach and Miri, I really had nothing to say. I was really disappointed how the movie performed. I thought it would do a lot better than our standard 30. I'd kind of run out of shit to say. By the time I got to Jersey Girl, I started manufacturing shit to say. Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Dogma, Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. That came from the mind of a 20-year-old kid who lived in his parents' not his basement, but in his own room, but in his parents, for years and years before he got out. Like, that's where I built an arsenal of material that I wanted to take out into the world. That's where I built those stories. Once I was done with those stories, I was like, okay, I like this job, and they pay you a lot of money. You never want to leave a party that's rocking, particularly when, like, you're one of the good guests where people, like, treat you well and shit. They're not like, pick that up, fatty. They're like, here's a drink. Would you like some more food? And you're like, yes, but would you like to fuck someone? Yes, I would. Like one of those Stanley Kubrick parties, man. You know, where everyone's wearing a hood and a mask, and they got a cane, and
they're all out on Long Island. You got to go to Long Island. Yeah.
I was looking on Staten Island. Well, that's the problem.
That's a mistake.
No, it's not happening there. I got fucked in Staten Island. I was the guy on the floor, robed behind me. I said, what are you doing? He said, this ain't Long Island, buddy, and he gave it to me hard.
I think it's interesting to say that you weren't prepared for it, because out of all the people that we could talk about in the 90s, you seemed to be the guy who was okay to walk up and, hey, I did the movie and I'm selling it. I mean, you were always, from word go, really good at that. They loved you at Sundance.
I've always been good at being able to speak. I mean, here's the thing. I look at other filmmakers. You look at somebody like David Fincher, who's an amazing filmmaker, and right now, you know, top of his game, Social Network, it's up for Oscars galore. I think he won the Golden Globe, didn't he?
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a dude who makes a film, puts it out there, then he goes off and makes another film. And you never hear David Fincher talking about, I got thrown off a fucking airplane. Can you believe this shit? And you never hear David Fincher talking about, I'm fighting with this person. You never hear David Fincher, I'm taking on the critics. Nothing. Dude does his work quietly, puts it out, and that's it. I've never, unfortunately, been that filmmaker. From the jump, with Clerks, since we had no cast or anything, Harvey and Bob Weinstein were like, look, you go out and advocate for the movie. You go be the person who's the front man for the movie. Who can advocate for the movie better than you? Who could sit there and talk more passionately about the movie than you can? And that's how, like, me and Quentin and Robert became kind of well-known names, because they were like, you talk about the movie. And when you put a filmmaker in there, out there talking about their work, independent film and passion, blah, 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 it's inspiring. You'll get people going. They're like, I don't know who this cat is, and I don't know anybody in the movie, but I'll give it a shot. He seems weird. It sounds okay. I've always been very good at being able to kind of express myself, and only got better over the years. But the problem with that is I express myself about my work far too much. I wind up never allowing it to just sit there by itself. There's always like, hey, there's a story around this, or afterwards I'm like, let me come out and explain what happened exactly. So I'm always going out there and talking about the work, standing up for the work, explaining the work, and other filmmakers don't have to do that. And I realized early on, like, that's just going to be part of my game. You know what I'm saying? Like, some people have one leg shorter than the other in life. My ear is a little higher over here than this one. Part of the gift of being able to tell any story I want is there's always going to be this kind of caveat of like, you're never going to be considered a real filmmaker. You're always going to be considered the Clerks guy. In the 90s and the aughts, there was enough money going on, crazy money. We're like, let's spend 20, 30 million marketing Jersey Girl. Let's see what happens. It could be a hit. Can't do that anymore. Like, I don't carry enough of an audience to warrant spending all that money on marketing, all the TV spots, the outdoor billboards, all the things that wind up costing. I can make a movie pretty inexpensively. I know how to bring it in cheaply. The one thing I can't change is how much they spend to sell it. And I have no control over that. No matter how hard I try to bring it down, it's going to cost what it's going to cost. And I felt like with this $4 million horror movie, Red State, we made, I always wanted to try this experiment. For years being in this business, looking at how much the marketing costs, looking at, like, I remember when the first time they put a Clerks commercial on TV, I was over the moon. I was like, oh my God, there's a commercial on television for Clerks. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I'm looking at a profit statement of where all the money went, and I'm looking at the money that was spent on a Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back ad that ran on Lifetime. Dude, nobody from Lifetime was ever seeing that commercial and going like, I'm going to give it a shot. But that's what they do. It's just like at the end of the day, they're like, look, your audience is coming. We're going to reach to a new audience that maybe doesn't know about you, so they want to advertise to people that don't know your stuff. But as I've said, my stuff doesn't appeal to everybody. It's a real rarefied taste and stuff. So why spend that money reaching those people? For years, they were like, if we spend this, we're going after these people who haven't come to see your movies. And I'd always say, what about the people who come? Like, there is an audience for this stuff. No, Kevin, they're coming anyway. Why not reach beyond them? And I always felt like, that's stupid. Like, honor the motherfuckers that come. Don't sit there and be like, we're going to chase after the imaginary dollar of your parents or your friend's parents who might come see it on a Friday night if we trick them into calling it like Zack and Miri instead of Zack and Miri Make a Porno. Like, to me, I just felt like I don't, in the 90s and aughts, you could do that. Me?
They're pissed off at you. I mean, the people who
honestly, I don't know who's pissed off. Like, when I made this decision to self-distribute, I spoke to, long before the world heard about it, long before we went up to Sundance, first thing I did was talk to every smart motherfucker I know in this business of show. There's not many, but I did talk to them all. And I was just, and we're talking about people in marketing at Warner Brothers, talking about people higher up than marketing at Warner Brothers, people high up at Weinstein, people at Paramount. Like, I know people in this business. You've been in this business long enough, you meet a lot of cats. And I said to them, hey, man, I'm thinking about trying this thing. I always wanted to take the movie out without spending any of the marketing money, because I know I can make a budget back, the budget of the film. But once they tack the marketing onto it, it's just like, I can't do that. Like, I can do $4 million in business with this movie, but I can't do $24 million, which is what it would be once they put on $20 million to advertise it, put TV spots on, you know, blow out a campaign. That's not even a large campaign. That's a moderate campaign of $20 million. Suddenly, I'd have to make 24 to make all the money back, but that ain't even true, because they don't get everything reported at the box office. Studios get half of that. They split it with exhibitors. The people actually own the theaters. So suddenly, I don't have to make 24 million. I've got to make 48 million just to break even on a $4 million horror movie. I can't do that. I don't have enough audience. No movie I've ever made has made more than $31 million. So where the fuck's that other money coming from? So I said, for the first time in years, I actually have a shot at doing something I always wondered if I could do. Can we sell the movie without selling the movie? Is it possible to just release the movie word of mouth and virally and just let it kind of live its life without inundating with commercials, without spending all that money? In this case, 5 times what it costs to make the movie, just to reach people to try to trick them into seeing it. I'd much rather talk to the audience that already exists for my stuff via the podcast, via Twitter, via any radio show I can get on, any microphone that I can get in front of. I could reach those cats and not spend any of that money. And I don't know. I just want to see if I could do it. To me, it's an experiment. I've done it 9 times the other way, where I watch people spend tens of millions of dollars to sell low-budget films. I would like to try it just once the other way before I get out of this business. And like I said, the next one's the last one. I felt like I want to try this as an experiment. And like, I got my investors to go like, we'll do it, because they knew they were protected everywhere else. Sell the movie internationally, sell DVD, sell TV. They're totally fine. I just wanted domestic to try this experiment of like, let me see if I can get it out there without spending any of that money. Might work, might not. Some people reacted to that. People in the press, some bloggers, really reacted poorly to that. Nobody in the business that I spoke to and the people I know said anything except like, good idea. Like when I first hit them up about it, I was like, would you do this? Do you think I could self-distribute a movie? And a lot of cats would be like, wait till Clerks 3, dude. It has a built-in audience. But I don't own Clerks. Like I sold that to Miramax. So I was like, how am I supposed to do, I can't do Dante and Randall without pairing up with someone else. And that just defeats the purpose of the exercise. So I was like, I feel like the horror movie's the way to go. And they were like, you know what, to be fair, you might get your audience show up. You also might just get horror movie people who don't even give a fuck about you. And I was like, all right, good point. So I've talked it out well in advance. By the time that news dropped, everybody in town knew what was going to happen, except some distributors who were looking to buy the movie. But having been in the room while the movie was playing, Fox Searchlight, one of the biggest independent distributors, still existed. Done Juno, done wonderful things there. They came to see the movie. We shoot the first motherfucker in the head. You've never seen 3 people get out of their seats quicker, man. And out the door. And they look like they wet themselves. Like, this ain't Juno. And out they went. So for me, I'm like, okay, if that's like the top gun in the business right now, Fox Searchlight, if they're looking at this going like, there ain't no market, this movie shouldn't have been made. Why would I spend more money on top of that? It seems to me, I've read some bloggers called me arrogant. They're like, he's taking his movie out. Who does he think he is? He's arrogant. Isn't it more arrogant to sit there and go, this $4 million movie that nobody wanted to give us money for and it took us 3 years to find cash, and even my biggest fans, Harvey and Bob Weinstein, didn't want to finance? We finally got it made. Now pour $20 million all over and pretend it's good. It just seems like bullshit. Pour $20 million on it and sell it. Lie to people and tell them they want to see it. Not everyone's going to want to see this movie. It's fucking bleak, dark. It's funny. It's very black satire. But it's not for everybody. It's a movie where nothing about it is conventional. You're not allowed to feel the way you feel in other movies. There's no score in the movie, dude. So there's never a moment where we're telling you it's safe now, relax. You have to decide in every moment of the movie how you feel in that exact moment. It's unconventional as hell. It's truly an indie film. At that point, why the fuck would I spend $20 million to sell a $4 million movie that nobody's going to want to see anymore? So I felt like, let me step off and try. This is the best and only time I'll ever have to try the experiment. And for that, a bunch of cats who maybe didn't understand this took off on me like immediately after the screening, and I got up and talked afterwards. Cut my legs out, dude. They were trying desperately to be like, he's mad, he's imploded, he's lost his mind, he's crazy. And I'm like, is that crazy? Like, am I fucking batshit? Isn't it crazier to spend 5 times the amount on a movie to sell it than it was to make it? Like, for one guy to stand up and be like, I just don't want to spend that money.
So why these people? Why not some of the Hollywood people? Why would it be bloggers and some of the magazine people?
Because I'm that person that engenders passion in 2 directions. I've been very fortunate, very blessed. My career has existed as long as it does because there are a lot of people who are like, I love them. I don't know why, but I love them. Look, reading Twitter now for the last few years, you start piecing it out. You start piecing it together because you're never going to understand. You sit there going, maybe it's the work, but it's not just the work. It's everything. And what you read is people going like, you're doing the thing that I dreamed about doing. And if you're doing it, there's still hope for me. And you stand in as a proxy for people, and that means something to me. The audience has always meant something to me, way more than the checks, way more than the motherfuckers that greenlit the movies. It was always about, what do you guys think? Because that's what this is all about. You throw a message out in the void, and you're like, do you understand? And you feel less alone because of it. That's art, and that's what filmmaking was to me. And then for a while, it just became my career. It's like, this is what I do for a living, and I like making this money, so I'm going to keep making films, even though they're not coming from the same desperate place of like, I must tell you this story. Sit the fuck down. You will never fucking believe this. And then I go on and on and on. So now I've got that back because I see the end in sight where I'm like, clearly I'm not going to be directing anymore. It's just not in my blood. I feel like I'm coming to the end of a 20-year journey. It's going to be 20 years since the moment I sat there and said, I want to be a filmmaker. And I poured my fucking heart into it. I borrow hockey terminology all the time. I empty the goddamn tank throughout my entire career on every one of those films, even the ones people don't like. They're like, I fucking hate Cop Out. I emptied the tank on Cop Out more than any other movie I ever made. I gave everything I had to kind of hold together a ship that was a little leaky and stuff. So you can say you don't like the shit, but I played full out, man. I never held back. I just went. You do anything like that for 20 years, you get to a point where you're like, I'm spent. Like, you have it all. You have everything I could possibly do in that arena. Anything I do after hit somebody is going to pale in comparison to anything I've done before. And you're going to sit there one day and be like, remember when Kevin used to make good movies? And they do that now, dude. There are people now who sit there and go like, he hasn't made good movies. What is he talking about? He's been bad since Clerks. But, you know,
but there are people, the people that you're saying that will use you to go, hey, he's a regular guy. They're the ones that want the most from you. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is...
And I'm happy to give it to them.
Yeah.
Because they're interested.
Maybe you grew up a regular guy and have a thing, but you write your ass off and you can sit here and talk. You're not a regular guy. You're the guy who's going to float up, whether you went into journalism, talk radio.
Maybe or maybe not. I've always felt Clerks was about luck and timing. Like, don't get me wrong. I know there's funny shit in Clerks, but anybody can be funny. In the right moment in time, even the boringest person says something devastatingly funny. So being funny is luck and timing, I think. But luck and timing for me on the movie really worked in as much as, like, we just said that thing at that time. If we'd gone that way, said it a year earlier, never happened. I don't believe it's manifest.
But maybe 20 years later, and everybody listening has had this experience. They're watching television, they're watching a movie, going, "This guy's doing Kevin Smith." I mean, you have that thing. You put your print on this no matter what.
Yeah, a little. That's the thing. Like, that's why I could go gracefully into the good night, because I'm never like, oh, I didn't get to do this. Like, look, there are plenty of people who played hockey, never lifted a Stanley Cup.
Right.
And it just happens. Sometimes, you know, and in our game, it's supposed to be about, did you win an Oscar? I was never going to win an Oscar. Look at the shit I made.
Yeah.
Come on. It was never going to happen.
You're not going to win an Oscar.
There's one dude in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. One dude says he'd suck the other dude's dick. They don't give Oscars for that unless they're cowboys and one's Heath Ledger. So for me, I knew that was never part of my game. That was never going to be what I was. I'm a grinder. I get out on the ice, I grind the shit out of it. I make up those periods. I'm the guy that, like, throws himself in front of a puck or throws himself into the boards against a dude, because that's going to help the fucking team. Yeah. And that's my role. And I knew that. I learned that early on, and I appreciated it because I was happy to play any fucking role in this game whatsoever. Anybody wants to give you a dime to make pretend for a living, that's a big bucket of win. And I did it for as long as I possibly could, and then I started finding other ways to do it. And the other ways to do it are way more interesting to me now. That's where my heart is. Mm-hmm. But I figure if I'm going to end this directing thing, end fucking strong. End the way I came in. And when I came in, I was fucking throwing elbows, bitch. And I was like, this is where the puck's going to be, man. I'm up here. People are back there. Here's where the puck. Look, Clark's bang, and it's in the net. And people are like, what the fuck happened? How'd that fat guy do that? That was a cool thing. Chasing aim. Even Mallrats. Like, at first people were like, it's stupid. And then years later, people were like, oh, it's not. It's brilliant. Whatever. That was the fire in the belly. And then I became complacent. I just want to end with the fire in the belly. I want to go out with the last two swinging so fucking hard. You know what I'm saying? Like, just take it right to the net. Like Phil Esposito says, not hard to score goals. You stand the top of the slot, take your shot, and take your beating. And I'll fucking take the beating, because if I'm going to end, if I'm not going to do this anymore, and I believe that in my heart of hearts, it's not one of these things where it's like 5 years from now I'm going to be like, I got to pay a mortgage. Dante and Randall have 2 kids in a daddy daycare situation. That's not going to happen. I know me, and I know when I'm done, I'm fucking done. And it's not saying I'll never direct again. I could direct a TV show, I'd direct a play, but it's just features, too costly, too expensive, and I'm not a creature made for those type of things, particularly in this global economy. Like, you're going to look now, you're going to see, it's going to be tougher and tougher to find movies that are different and original for a while, because the economy's right in the toilet. You're going to see a lot of movies that are remakes and sequels. And I'm not a remake or sequel guy. I can watch them and love them, and I'm not one of these people who's like, they're ruining the original. I'm like, show me another version. It's like a cover song. But I can't do that. Like, that's not my ability. And for me to stand in this business and be like, well, I can make something with a number in it, or I can remake something that other people have liked, that's not why I got into it, and it feels false, and I feel like I'm just cashing a check at that point.
Well, you've got these fans that have stuck with you throughout it all.
And now I get to let them go. I'm going to need them where I'm heading next.
Are you going to stay in touch no matter what projects you're keeping this thing together? But here's the one thing to worry about. It's not like it seems like you can grow new fans without the big movie.
That's the thing. You know? Like, for the last... Like, nobody comes to decisions like these. Like, I didn't wake up and, you know, like the dude in Network where I'm like, I must make my witness or something like that. Like, this is all well thought out, and you know, you piece all the things together and whatnot. I'm just kind of getting to a place where I'm like, all this other stuff is interesting, and I'm putting a lot more time into it, and they're following me there. Right. For the last 2 years, dude, I've made more standing on a stage and talking about directing than I have directing film, because I just do it a lot more now. I get up on stage, like, between movies, that's how I support myself. Like, they pay well in the features and whatnot, but I go out on the road and do a night and Q&A and whatnot, and it's wonderful money, and it's even better money because I feel like I earn it, because I'll sit there and do a 3, 5, 7-hour show, something I can't do in film. I could pour it into the film, but ultimately it's going to look the way it's going to look. But on that stage, man, I could pour it out. I can empty the tank and make you go like, Jesus, I don't like his movies, but he loves to talk.
Yeah, I know. And I totally get that. But are they going to want to come to see the guy who made a movie 10 years ago, 15 years ago?
I hope so. I've been kind of, if one can be so arrogant as to say they've groomed their audience, I've spent the last few years doing so many other things, testing the waters, like, you guys okay with this? And watching people react to it. Smodcast was the beginning of that. Smodcast was a thing I do with Scott Mosier and became its own network in our world. Started off not as like, let's replace everything we've done before, but it was the beginning of the end. It was like me and Scott Mosier being able to sit down and do a very inexpensive version of making the movies by just sitting there and talking to one another. And we did that for 3 years before we grew that network and added more shows. And I just waited and listened to people's reactions, see if they liked it and stuff, and listened to the pods that were, when we talked about the movies, it was like, okay, do people like that more, or do people like it when we talk about shit that's not the movies? And we found slowly over time that's just like, they don't care about the movies. It doesn't matter. Like, I learned early on with the Q&As. I used to go out, we'd show the movie, and then I'd come out afterwards and we'd talk. I'd do questions for like a half an hour. Then after about a year of doing that, it went from a half hour to an hour to 2 hours. And then I was like, why are we even watching these movies anymore? Like, anybody who's coming to see me talk has probably seen this shit a zillion times. So let's kill the movie and just talk even longer. So suddenly you're talking for 5 hours, 7 hours, longest one I ever did in Red Bank. You know, and that's when like half the audience is gone. They're like, you ain't Springsteen. They leave. So for me, there was definitely like, I've been chumming the waters with everything else other than film for a few years, just to make sure that people were like, okay, we can see this transition, just so it doesn't seem as sudden to other people. Like, I guess some people are like, where's this coming from? But I'm like, if you listen to all those podcasts I've been doing for 3 years, you hear it. It's there. I've been telegraphing this for a while. Like, it's coming to a close. It's going to end. And when I end, I'm going to try to end strong. That's the new part of the message. The one thing that I never really said until Red State, because it wasn't until people could see it that I can make the claim and tell them what's in my heart. And what's in my heart is, I want to end as strongly as I started. I want to knock your fucking socks out. You know, I don't want you to sit there and apologize for liking Cop Out because you like me. I want to make a movie that fucking blows your hair back and go, I want to end in a way where people go, why are you stopping? And I'm like, that's why, because I can never do better than that. So for me, that's the time. And once I do that, then I could do all this other cool shit that I normally kind of do between the movies, and this would become the main focus. Like, honestly, anybody in radio should be very scared right now, because I'm like, I'm done with film. Guess where I want to go, you know? And I can talk, bitch, as you can see. And if they pay by the word, I'm fucking a billionaire.
Oh, no, so. They don't pay by the word. Because it's really funny, because I've been doing radio a long time, and I thought, I'll make the next fucking movie. Isn't it the weirdest thing in the world?
Yes.
You're just like, well, let's switch.
Yes. You just look at everyone else's job and go, that seems way funner.
So much better.
I love, for years and years, that was one of my favorite things about making the flicks, is it afforded me the ability to go into places that I never would. And I'm not talking about parties, the rich and famous. I'm literally talking about a radio station where somebody was like, hey man, we're going to talk to you for a little bit. I remember I did a radio interview, 1994, out in Los Angeles, Kevin and Bean show. Sure. And I was talking about Clerks was coming out in a couple weeks, and we were getting ready for Mallrats, actually. So some chick who I went to high school with, who would never give me the time of day in high school, heard the interview out in California, called my father back in Jersey going, is Kevin out here? Does he have a number? My father gave her the number. We got in touch. She fucked me. And she was amazing, you know what I'm saying? Like, she was, prior to her, I didn't believe in the female orgasm, you know what I'm saying? I thought I had to eat a woman to make her come. This chick was on top of me, coming like Christmas. I was like, this is fantastic. I love being on the radio. So at that point...
This is the same girl, she had already fucked Kevin and Bean, though. That's the thing.
I didn't care.
2 of their interns.
It was awesome. I literally remember being in high school, and she's a really sweet lady, and we're still friends, of course. But
sounds great.
Being in high school, I remember being in high school with her once, and being at a party at my friend Mike Bellicos' house, passing her in the hall. We've both been drinking and making the, hey man, you want to kiss? And her being like, no, Kevin, we're just friends. And I had to live with that for years.
Yeah.
Until she called me up, and all of a sudden we start fucking. I'm like, I guess you did want to kiss. But shit like that, like, always made an impact for me, where I'm like, oh my God, like the notion of sitting down, like, radio is my medium, dude. Look at me. I got a body for radio.
Sure.
I could talk to a chick on the mic, and she might be like, I would fuck that guy. She'd get in a room and be like, ew. But I built it up all that time. You know, that's how I've been fat my whole life. The only way you get laid is through your sense of humor or saying something that is touching or meaningful to some, I was going to say to somebody, but specifically chicks. But I'll take a dude anytime. And that for me has always kind of been like the honesty factor or the funny factor. That gets you over, like, not looking like everybody else or not even looking attractive.
Well, you know, that's the funny thing. Like, if you're in the business to pick up chicks, you wouldn't make your kind of movies. Like, you're like heavy metal, where you show up and it's all fucking dudes. And
yes.
Didn't you always worry about metal bands? You're like, why are you doing this?
Totally. Because they believe in Satan and chugging cock.
Yeah.
It's true, though. I do have I have a Star Trek audience. Actually, Star Trek has more female interest. I look out in this audience. Like, dude, I sold out Carnegie Hall 2 years ago. It was one of the proudest things. I'll say it until the day I die, because I never imagined a dude like me could do it. I looked out in that crowd. I was like, I could never get laid off of this.
No.
Unless I was way into dick, because it's just a big sausage party, man. Every once in a while, you see a girl disappointed sit next to the dude like, I hate this guy. You know?
She's just being a good sport.
Trying, yeah, she tries. She goes the extra mile for her man, I guess.
So your audience, and that is the strangest thing of all, and this is weirds me out that you haven't lost them, is that you stay closer to them than anyone else.
Yes.
I mean, there's enough time that if you're interested in Kevin Smith, you've got it by now, and you could walk away and be interested in someone else. Why, when you're doing all this, you're out? I mean, you've probably met everybody that is crazy.
I feel at times like I have met every Kevin Smith fan on the planet. And we used to have like View Askew Vulgarthons, we call them, mini film festivals of every flick we'd done, where we'd sell like little theaters, 400, 600 seats. Once we did in California at the Cinerama Dome, was 800 seats. But we show all the movies all day long. You're literally meeting the people who go to your movies and stuff. And we started that back in like 96. So early on, like 95 is when we opened the View Askew website. And Ming Chen, who is our web designer, still is to this day, I said, I want to be able to have like a Q&A once a week with people. Is that possible? And he goes, well, I could give you a message board. It'd be even easier. I said, what's that? And he goes, message board, people just put up whatever they want, and then you can respond to it whenever you want. Then when it happens later on, and I was just like, I'll never be alone again. You know, like, I'll be able to answer questions in the middle of the night to people who are just like up as well. And even if they answered questions hours before. So we started that relationship with the audience. I've always like loved the audience, because without them I have no fucking job. If they don't buy tickets, nobody goes and gives me another job. So to me, it's always been like, I love them, but they're also employers. So you treat them with affection and fucking respect. You don't ignore or fucking bitch slap your audience. I spend time with them. And like, you'd sit there and after Q&A, people would be like, we gotta go. And I'm like, hold on, a few more minutes. You just go, you keep going, you keep giving, and it's not hard. It was never hard. People are like, how do you do it? I'm like, are you kidding me? Do you know how fucking easy it is to sit there and have somebody be like, you rock? You're like, thank you. You know, let me tell you a story about when I rocked once.
Well, what about the you suck people? I mean, do you take that
That
hard?
comes with it. As much passion as I engender in one direction, you got to carry it the other way as well. Mercifully, it's not as big as the people who like me, but the ones who don't like me are more vocal than the ones that do like me. So you tend to hear from them a lot more, and you imagine them early in the day to be this massive beast that travels throughout the land looking to eat you and your children. You know, it's like, we're coming for you, Kevin. And then you realize it's not necessarily the case. Like, there are some people with kind of strong opinions, but it's not like the people that don't like me aren't campaigning against me to bring me down or something. Most people are just dismissive. Every once in a while, you get a real crackpot who's like, I'm going to write about this motherfucker until he acknowledges my existence. Right. And you can see through. I mean, I've been doing this almost 20 years. You could see through that shit pretty easily. Early in the day, I'd fall for that. Somebody would go after me. What'd you say? And I'd fight him online as if like anyone wins in that situation. Right. And I would do it a lot and shit, just so I could be the tallest midget online, I guess. But you kind of grow and you learn like, oh, they're just this is more beneficial to them. If they go after you and you start attacking them, they get more attention, they get more hits, blah, blah, blah. So you just kind of learn to separate. There's ones that are just vicious for the sake of being vicious. Now, how do you separate good criticism from bad criticism, or good notes, or a good insight from just somebody who's wanting to, like, shit in your mouth just because they know that you're happy? You know, I'll be out there talking about a movie I love so much, and somebody will be like, yeah, I thought this movie was facile and stupid. And you're like, oh, God. So how do you separate it? It takes time. It takes a long time to learn how to do it, and I don't think I'm still very good at it. I got in a fight with a bunch of the whole critical community last year after Cop Out. I felt like Engelbert in the Bad News Bears. They're like, he got in a fight. They're like, with who? The third grade. Who in third grade? The whole third grade. You know.
Yeah, right.
I got in a fight with the whole critical community, and it just got bigger and weirder and stuff like that. And at one point,
and they used to love you.
They do.
When you came
they
in,
did.
they were crazy.
Yes, yeah. Well, let's be fair. They loved Clerks a lot, and everybody loved Clerks. So that's kind of easy. Not everybody, but that's an easy movie to love. Mallrats they didn't like. You know, if we're talking about the critical community as a whole, as a group, Mallrats was trashed. Like, they treated Mallrats the way they treated Cop Out. The general consensus was, if this is what the dude who made Clerks is going to do with a studio job, fuck him. Fuck this bullshit. And so for years I was like, oh my God, everyone hates Mallrats. Until I went out into the real world, and people were like, I fucking love Mallrats, dude. Like, that's the movie that people come up to me the most and go, like, I found Chasing Amy because of Mallrats. Mallrats' first movie years I saw. A friend of mine had a VHS. We watched it to death, something like that. And you realize that nothing's wasted. Some motherfucker will tell you, you were bad for doing this. This is wrong. You should regret it. And 10 years from now, I'm like, this is the best fucking decision I ever made. Like, everyone wants to judge right there in the moment. Like, I watched it happen at Sundance. Movie ended, people wrote like that without even thinking about what they saw. They just immediately started writing without even thinking about what I said about distributing the movie. They just started writing. A, they need content. B, they want to be the first to get all the attention, to get the hits and stuff. But C, there's no thought behind it anymore. They're not sitting there going, okay, what did it mean? What does this all mean? What is he talking about? Is he arrogant, or is he just like, wait a second, he's actually trying to save money? People don't think. They just want to react. And I engender that a lot. Because, like I said, people like me a lot. There will be people who just don't like me because people do like me. And they'll knee-jerk and jump at me for shit. I take it. I don't care. If that's the price you got to pay for this fucking dream job, that's nothing. You know what I'm saying? Some cats talking shit used to bug me forever, dude. Like, oh my God, they wrote bad things about me on the internet. Everyone will know that I'm a bad filmmaker or something like that. Then you get to a point where you're just like, it's not true. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's that person's subjective truth. But it doesn't mean that it's yours. And for years, I would let people tell me how to feel about the things I did based on what they would say, based on the reviews they would write. And I just reached a point where I kind of like grew up, where I was like, you know what? Nobody can tell me how to feel about me except me. I'm the only one that has to live in this fucking horrendous excuse for a fucking body. I'm the only one that has to sleep with me except for my unfortunate wife. And I'm the only one that has to listen to those thoughts in the middle of the night going, you should have did this. Why didn't you do this? You're a fraud. You're no damn good. Blah, blah, blah. I hear that shit. I don't need it from the external forces. I got enough of it right here. But once you get to a place, you can't live your whole life in service to, especially if you're creating art in some way, to somebody else's point of view, because it's just like, then you do it, dude. Like, this is the one I wanted to make. That's the thing that's always kind of hit me weird about film criticism, is essentially somebody telling you fucked up, and you're like, how do you fuck up art? Art is subjective. Like, you're supposed to like it, you're not supposed to like it. He'll like it, she won't. She'll love it, he won't. Like, it changes. It's not one universal thing. If it is, it's not art anymore. If everybody agrees on it, it's marketing.
But it almost seems like a safer way to be is almost to take that Prince thing where you keep mysterious and, you know, you drop something from the mountaintop. You're going to lower this piece of gold for you people.
Right.
Fight over it.
I can't make that approach because I'm the guy. I'm lowering myself into the crowd. Who wants to hear about the time I love Superman?
And it's so true. And the weirdest thing is like out of a lot of, well, maybe not, but it seems like you're one of the more sensitive filmmakers.
Well, here's the thing.
And I think Tarantino also is. I've seen him get his feelings hurt.
He does, and he got mad at me once. I said in a book, in John Pearson's book, I said, I think Quentin's a better writer than a director any day. Right. And years later, somebody told me, Quentin came into the store. This is weird. We had a store, Jay and Silent Bob's Secret Stash in Westwood out in California. They're like, Quentin was eating at a restaurant next door, came in, a little inebriated, and was looking around, thought the place looked great, was very talkative. This is cool, this is cool. Then all of a sudden saw this book, Spike, Mike, Slackers, and Dykes, that I'd been in. A friend of mine, John Pearson, wrote.
Yeah, I read it.
And I was the dude that was the voice of the young filmmaker. And in that book, age 23, 24, 1994, Jackass Me makes the comment of, I think he's a better writer than a director. He remembered it, and he said it to the person behind the counter. He's like, that fat fuck said about me in this book. And I was like, he was mad. He was kind of a little drunk mad at you, dude. Don't be around Quentin with that book if he's got a drink in his hand.
You also said Reservoir Dogs is better than Pulp Fiction.
Yes, he didn't like that. He
kind of tried to play to the masses.
I did. I was like, I went the garage band route. Like, they were good when they were by themselves.
Right.
And once they had a label, they suck. I totally took that approach, but not bashing. But I was just like, look, I love Reservoir Dogs. It wasn't until like 2 years later that I'm like, oh, I see the brilliance of his directing, the subtlety of his directing. The more I learn about the art of directing, the more I could go back and look at other people's work and be like, oh my God, this dude is way better at. He's actually equally good at both things and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But he can be a little sensitive. I wouldn't say he's the most though. I would definitely they're all sensitive. I'll be honest with you. Every fucking one of them I've met, every filmmaker, man or woman, who's put something out there is sensitive. You can't do this job unless you're a little precious. You got to be a little emo to be in film. I hate to say it, but it's fucking true. You got to be a little emo. So all of them won't talk about it. A lot of them go on like, I don't read my reviews. Who gives a fuck what they say? I think I'm the only one for the last 20 years who's been like painfully honest about every feeling I've ever had. I say it.
You read tweets. You read everything.
Yes.
You're replying to some asshole kid in Indiana.
But that to me, but that asshole kid is like, that asshole kid put his life together in such a way that he had to score $10, whatever, to go out and see that flick. That opinion means something. Anybody who pays to see the movie will always have my ear, because we know how difficult it is to do anything in this life, let alone organize a fucking movie date anymore.
Right.
And it's crushingly expensive sometimes now. So when somebody's like, hey, I did all this, like when Cop Out opened here in New York, it opened on the day of a blizzard. Tons of snow going down. And I got a tweet, man, that summed it up best for me. Guy goes, it is fucking freezing out. I have to find 2 babysitters to watch 3 different kids. There's so much snow on the ground, I don't know if I'm going to make it to the theater, but I'm going out to see Cop Out because you've done so many free Smodcasts. This better be good. And I waited with bated breath for 3 hours for that motherfucker to get back, because I was like, this is the most important review we'll ever get on Cop Out. And sure enough, he was like, it was good, it was funny. It was funny. He didn't go over the moon, he wasn't like, you reinvented the genre, but I was never going to get that on those day of those circumstances. But the fact that he went through all those trials and still was able to be like, I like this funny shit.
Well, another thing that you do is after Cop Out, and again, I guess it has to do with your sensitivity, you threw a couple elbows at Bruce Willis, and nobody...
Not afterwards. That came way later.
Oh, came way later. But directors don't say stuff about movie stars.
Generally, you're not supposed to. But I worked with Bruce for 1 full week before I did my Carnegie Hall gig. And when I got on stage at Carnegie Hall, no lie, if you ever saw the Epic's Too Fat for 40 thing, I tell the Die Hard story there, working with Bruce, same fucking story I told on the Carnegie Hall stage 5 days after working with him for the first time. Like, right away, I was honest and upfront about, like, this is not what I expected at all. You know what I'm saying? I went in, and probably a lot of it has to do with me. It's my fault. I'll take the blame. I don't give a shit. I went in there working with a dude who I was a massive fan of, and that's kind of how I went in treating him, I guess. And he don't respond well to that kind of thing. Like, look, here's plain simple truth. I'm on a movie set with people I know. I could say to Ben Affleck, dude, take that dick, put it in your mouth. And he'll do it. And, like, he'll sit there, maybe not anymore. He's made the town now. But back in the day, he would do it. And he'd sit there with that dick in his mouth and shit, and he'd hate it, but he'd be like, well, I trust Kevin. Always knows what he's doing, except on Jersey Girl, you know. But he trusts me because I would never make him look bad. Like, I care about actors, and I care about performance, and I care about the story. So naturally, I'm going to go out of my way and make this motherfucker look pimp. He was my ticket to ride. Ben Affleck, I saw him in Mallrats, and he worked with him in Mallrats, but it was afterwards getting to know him. I was like, dude, you should be a fucking leading man. Like, why are you playing dudes that beat up other dudes? Like, you're charming and funny and shit. And that's why I wrote Chasing Amy for the dude, because I just kind of really believed in him. He had something that felt like that could translate. You could be more than just this line of little pigeonhole fucking role they put him in. Anyway, Ben will do anything for me, or at least he would, because he trusts me. I went on to the set of Die Hard. I was like, Bruce, put that dick in your mouth. And he pulled out John McClane's gun, shot me between the eyes. You know, he was just like, I'm not putting my dick in my mouth. All my teaching, 25 years in this business. He's a quarter century he's been doing. He's a movie star for 25 years. All of his teaching tells him, you don't fucking put the dick in your mouth. So he was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be the author of my own performance. I got this. And there was definitely Kevin, you made fucking Mallrats. That kind of thing, which I'm like, I don't care. Like, I'll be the first guy to be like, yeah, I did make Mallrats, and maybe it wasn't that cool to you, but I like it. But at the end of the day, that dude, I feel like if you're going to be that guy who's just like, well, I don't have to listen to you, you're not very good at what you do, why are you there in the first place? Like, is the money that green?
So why was he there? Do you know? Was it for money?
Maybe he thought it would be a good idea, and like 2 days in, he was just like, I don't like this fat fuck. It's possible. Like, people always want some fucking, like, big, like, you know, I fucked Demi Moore, and he was mad about it. No, it's nothing like that. Sometimes it's just as simple as, like, you meet a guy, you know people in your life, you got friends who are like, you know this fucking dude Barry? Barry's the best. And you're like, Barry's a fucking asshole. And they're like, what'd you say? And you're like, I don't know, you know, Barry ain't too fucking cool. And they're like, why? Why don't you like Barry? And you're like, you can't put your finger on it. You're just like, I don't know, I just don't like that fucking guy. I have that. Some people meet me and have that. And I think Bruce, even though I worked with him as an actor on the Live Free, Die Hard, yeah. When you come at him as, I'm in charge of this shit, and I wasn't coming at him like, you listen to me, you bald prick. But I was just like, hey, man, I'm the director. I'm supposed to kind of tell you what to do, and you tell me you don't want that. It's just like, well, I don't know what to do then. I guess I'll be working with the actors who do want direction.
But so is that a casting mistake? Because I
wouldn't call it a mistake. I mean, like, that was a huge coup. Like, at first, it was supposed, when I got onto the project, it was going to be Marky Mark and Will Ferrell. And they couldn't make that deal. Warner Bros. Didn't want to pay him the full freight salary at making a rated R movie. They kept saying, make it PG-13, we'll pay you guys what you want. And those dudes were like, no, we want to do a rated R movie. And they agreed to disagree. They went across the street, set up the other movie, the Other Guys, it was called. So that left us back at Warner Bros. No fucking stars or anything like that, and just me kind of attached to it. Jeff Robinoff, the guy who runs Warner Bros., is like, you want to stick around? You want to stay on? And I was like, you serious? And he's like, yeah. I was like, I thought once Marky Mark took his underwear, we'd be done. And he goes, no. He's like, let's try to build the movie around you. And then he called me like 2 days later, and he's like, what do you think of Bruce Willis? And I was like, Bruce Willis! And he was like, well, Bruce is really interested, and he says he knows you from Live Free or Die Hard. Like, I had to get approved by Bruce, and he did. So I was like, you know, there's things, look, I'm disappointed, and I've said a few places, like, oh, it was heartbreaking or heart-wrenching or blah, blah, blah. You know, it was obviously me fucking speaking hyperbolically. My heart did not break. It was disappointing that the dude you hoped he wasn't that dude at all. But at the end of the day, that dude gave me something. He gave me a really special gift. When I was a fucking 14, 16-year-old kid, I used to sit in my parents' house on the couch watching him in Moonlighting, watching him as David Addison. And David Addison was quick, sharp, and the way he played him, we all wanted to be that guy. We'd all take a little bit of David Addison for ourselves. He was the guy we most wanted to be at that age. And I never in a million years imagined that I'd work with that man. And he gave me that opportunity. So I'll always thank him for that. Like when we were at the premiere of the movie in New York, you know, you go down a list of people you want to give shout-outs to. And for me, I was like, what do I say? What do I say about Bruce and still be honest? And I was like, you know what? This is flat-out honest. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to make a dream of a 16-year-old boy come true. It was amazing. Like, I'd never imagined that I could ever work with Bruce Willis in that capacity or ever, or even see him. And there I was working with him every day. So for that, I was just like, that's really cool. And you concentrate on that rather than going like, oh, it didn't go as well as it could have, or we didn't become best friends or something like that. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a stoner. You don't get along with everybody. Some people don't like stoners, I guess. I don't know.
But does it seem like it's good for you to have a battle in your life, whether it's critics,
I would prefer not. A lot of people.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah. Oh God, I hate it so much. I hate unrest. Like you read about. It makes me nauseous when people write something where I'm like, oh my God, I gotta fucking go out and correct this now. I hate it. I hate controversy. I don't like getting into battles with people. But at the end of the day, my mother and father raised me in a very specific way. They're like, you getting fucked and you don't want to get fucked, speak up. And so for years, if ever I felt like, oh, you've crossed the line, this person's crossed the line, I don't sit there and take it with a smile. I just kind of express myself. And I don't necessarily go for the jugular, but I will I tell everybody everything in my life. Why would I not talk about the friction? That's the interesting shit. Never mind, like, we get along great, all me and these other people. Everyone wants to hear, like, how come you didn't get along with Bruce? What's that about? That's the more interesting fucking story. So for me, it's like, I would rather it didn't exist, but I share everything anyway. It would feel false or disingenuous of me to hold something back. So I do wind up oversharing, and it does get me into trouble. And it does, like, you can sit there, and I've seen pieces, like, all right, Kevin fought these people here. This was his issue this year.
Right.
This is who he was mad at now. And it's a shame, but it's like, I can't do it any other way. I won't sit there and just kind of like let people shit in my mouth if I can defend myself a little bit, or at least explain my side of the story. Look, I'll never convince people to like something I've done if they don't like it. It's subjective.
Right.
But if they spread misinformation or horse shit about me, I feel like I've got a right to stand up and be like, that's not true, here's the real information.
Isn't it funny, though, how much of that stuff is just from when we were kids?
Yes.
Like, if you had to hit back, Mom, if your mom said, I need you to go back and, you would do that. Now you try to explain that to kids now, and they're like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Hit back, they don't, don't we call the police?
No,
we get help?
back then parents encouraged children to, like, kill them.
Well, it's an amazing story, and it's really cool to talk to you.
I've been wanting to, I was telling you before we came in, I've been wanting to do this for a while, because Twitter, like, you have a huge following and huge love there, and everyone's like, how come you never on Ron and Fez? I always thought you guys were in, like, Washington or something.
Well, we were for a while, and
now you're here.
Now we're here.
But when they called me and they were like, we want to do this, I was like, oh, I would love to do this, because it would kill so many birds with one stone. I've always wanted to sit down with both Ron and Fez or whatever, and I would just love to be able to chit-chat. I like radio, as you could see.
Yeah.
I like this. I like Sirius XM. Everything lined up well where I was like, make sure that that's going to happen. I was supposed to do a full radio tour beyond just this, I think, for a bunch of Sirius XM. And we had to move stuff around because I'm leaving to go to Berlin. But we changed the flight just because I was like, I want to sit here and fucking talk to you.
Well, that's so cool.
Because I knew you would let me talk, and you're a cool guy. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it, and I do want to say this, so thanks, everybody. I think it's very important that I tell you that there is no room for you in radio. Don't bring
I knew it. I'm too late, man. Damn it.
And the funny thing is, 94. The exact same
That would have been it. I should have went there. 2 roads diversion in Yellowwood. I took the wrong path, damn it.
Ladies and gentlemen, for being such a young man and literally a legend and making another giant move, and it's a serious thing, Kevin Smith, everybody. Kevin.
About when I was a young boy, I was a mimic, and I could imitate people in the neighborhood, authority figures, teachers, shop owners, other parents, cops on the beat, and people on television. Yeah, I could do little imitations. They were largely imitations of other people doing imitations. That's how you learn to do Jimmy Cagney. You see another guy do it on stage, and you say, oh, okay, and you copy him. This got me the attention of adults, because don't forget, I was alone in that house most of the day when I wasn't in school. I came home and I was alone. I got the attention of these adults, and I got their approval through their laughter. They were more or less saying, good boy, George, good going, way to go. Yes, he's good, he's cute. Ain't I cute, ain't I clever? That's what this job is. So as a youngster, I wanted to be a comedian. I was probably only 8 or 9 or 10 years old when I began to form an idea that I wanted to be in the movies like Danny Kaye and like Red Skelton, and I called that being an actor, but it was actually being a comedian. And pretty soon I found out the word comedian, and I wanted to be a comedian. And when I graduated from 8th grade, the last thing I graduated from, by the way, my mother asked me what I wanted, and one of the brothers at school, Brother Conrad, had told us that he can get a clergyman's discount on cameras. So I asked him if he could get a clergyman's discount on tape recorders. I bought this big Webcor, long story, and I'm keeping it long, that I used it to do voices and do little sketches and skits and fake radio shows and fake newscasts and commercials. And I used it to more or less train myself for the thing I wanted to do. My mother was very progressive to have bought me that as a graduation present. I mean, she was a far thinker to see that in me and go ahead and foster that and reward that. Even though she didn't want me to follow it, but she knew it was a healthy thing for me to be doing.
You've always been a planner.
Yeah,
you had this optimistic
Georgie plans, they call it.
Yeah, this optimistic attitude that if you planned it well enough and you meant well, it's going to happen. You believe that?
Well, I would only plan things I felt, that obviously that I wanted and thought I was qualified for. But this is the good example of this career planning. When I was a kid, I said, well, first I'll be, I wanted to be an actor. I called it actor because I saw them in the movies and I knew they were movie actors. So Danny Kaye and these guys, I thought actor. Okay, so first I'll be a stand-up comedian. And don't forget, when I was a kid, the only place stand-up comedians worked was nightclubs. Right. Those kind of really more or less sophisticated places where you saw in the movies, and people danced, and there was a singer, and there was a comic, and I never got into those places. I was too young, and it wasn't in my world. So I knew about comedians from radio and from television later, but movies when I was a youngster. So I aimed at that, and I thought, well, the way to get there would be to first get into radio. That would be my first move, because then I could practice using my voice, and I could learn to speak and do a lot of these things without an audience directly in front of me, which is the usual thing in radio. They're not sitting in the studio, and therefore I wouldn't be as nervous or afraid, and I could become a comedian, because by then there were further venues for comedians. I thought, then I can be a stand-up comedian, and then I can go, then if I'm really good at that, then they have to let me in the movies. And that was the way I looked at it. They had to let me in the movies. And that was the plan, and it became more sophisticated as I went through 13, 14, 15 years and out it.
Now, you actually revealed your life's plan in, what, were you 11 years old?
Yeah, when I was 11, was 5th grade, Sister Nina, and I saw her, by the way, just about 3 or 4 years ago. She came to a show of mine up in Wisconsin. Yeah, she was 81, sharp as can be. 5th grade, Sister Nina, I used to sing at the club meeting. They had once a week, they'd have a club meeting, and there'd be new business and old business and all that kind of stuff. And then there'd be the entertainment. You could do an imitation, you could bring in your banjo, play the piano, sing a song. I would always stand up and sing a song.
3 high schools.
That's right.
Kicked out of choir, kicked out of summer camp.
Altar Boys, summer camp,
Altar Boys,
and Boy Scouts.
And
that's called... Yeah, that's
Air Force.
That's called the hat trick.
Now, what was the terminology the Air Force used?
The Air Force discharge? That was it was a general discharge under honorable conditions. It wasn't a BCD, a bad conduct, and it wasn't a dishonorable. So I got all my pay and allowances. But they let me out early because they were looking to cut manpower, and they looked in the areas of people who were being less productive than others. And I had stopped. I was in a very elite maintenance squadron. We had to have the highest IQs going into the Air Force of anyone to get into K systems. We ran and maintained the bomb navigation system. They were analog computers and radar systems and optics. We repaired them, and that was a very advanced system that was in the Boeing 747, which was the medium bomber. And I got out of the maintenance area. Once I got the job in the Air Force, they thought, well, that's pretty good. We got a guy. They were doing kind of public relations for the base. You know, this is good for the Air Force base to have a guy who's being productive and not just knocking up local girls, you know. So I got out of my career field, as they call it, and because I was not productive in their minds, and so I could get out 11 months early. And I got out at 20, and at 20 I had my GI Bill of Rights, and I had 3 years experience in the field I wanted, and I had beat the game.
Very good.
Yes. It was a good start. It was a great start. It let me know that, man, you can make some breaks for yourself.
And the next stop was KXOL, and you met in Fort Worth. Right?
I met Jack Burns in Boston on radio up there, but I wasn't suited for that station. It was a network station with soap operas and stuff, and I went up there because you always want to get to a bigger market. When you're in radio, the first thing you do is you start recording your voice. You start taping to make your tape. You start making your audition tape so you can get to a bigger market. There's more money, more exposures, you can move on. It's a farm system, you know. So I wanted to get to Boston. I thought, well, I'll go to that station. I had a friend who got me in there. The guy was in the sales department. And I figured, well, I can make a base there, and I can look around Boston for a top 40 station to go to. But it never worked out. But I met Jack Burns there. We roomed together with a third guy, Ron, and I got kicked out of there for taking the news unit, the mobile news unit, from Boston to New York on the weekend just to buy some grass.
Right.
That was what I did. So, you know, once the twig is bent, you know, so grows the tree. And there I was.
Well, wait a minute. You didn't go there because the pot was so good in New York. You didn't know anybody in Boston, right?
I didn't know anybody in Boston, and I wanted to be with my buddies down in New York.
Right.
So we were 5 of us driving all through Harlem looking for grass because we knew where to go. 135th Street was the stop. We had certain stops we could make to buy grass. And we're driving around in this thing with, it says on the outside, it says WEZE, NBC News, you know. And we're looking for grass, and we're all like guys, you know, in our early 20s. So it was a lot of fun. But got fired from there, was out of a job for a while, and then I got called down to Fort Worth, where another guy from radio in Shreveport had moved on, a sales director, and he wanted me for their station in Fort Worth, so he brought me down there. So #1 station, I got the homework shift, 7 to midnight, answered my own phones, took all my own requests and dedications, and suddenly one day Jack Burns showed up from Boston. He says, I'm going out to give Hollywood one last chance at me. That was his attitude, which is the way to look at things. And his tires were bald, so luckily a news job had opened that day, and he got that job, and he was my nighttime newsman. And you know the rest. We went down to an after-hours comedy joint, which was really a coffee house called The Cellar in Fort Worth, and we did impromptu sketches every night, impromptu skits and two-man stuff. And it was so successful, we left radio. We said, screw this. You know, we had great jobs. We were making like $300, $400 a week. It's 1960, and we're in Fort Worth, a good market at work, and my mother inherited that. The Irish have that to a great degree. Some do, some don't, but it's kind of a generalization, but it's true. It's an Irish trait, language, and gift of gab. My father had it, my mother had it, so it was natural for me to have that, and then she reinforced it. These things have to be reinforced as well, and she reinforced it in me.
Now, your brother, Patrick, was 5 years older than you.
Patrick, yes.
Usually when you have a brother 5 years older, you usually become the punching bag.
I know.
How did he
was
handle
too busy out getting laid and fighting and drinking. He don't want to bother with that. He don't have time for bullying, and it's not in his nature, really. You know what he told me? He said, I was so glad when you came home from the hospital. He says, I was so curious about you, and I used to watch you in the crib, you know. And so he has a wonderful, wonderful nature, but he inherited, I think, also my father's temper. So he was more of a fighter than I was. He was a physical guy, you know, in the bars and on the street corners. But I wasn't really of that type.
You, in fact, used one of Patrick's jokes last night on stage.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's still alive, of course, up in Woodstock. He said something that I wrote down a long time ago, and I just started saying it recently. He said, what we should do is take all the mentally defective people in this country and give them government jobs and just sit back and watch things improve. He's a pretty funny guy and very verbal, very, very verbal. More so than I think.
You and him have a sort of a same perspective on things, don't you?
Pat and I?
Yeah.
You know, we both, for the most part, think this experiment was nice while it lasted, and we're not too impressed with the human species. We were street corner guys.
Speaking of street corner, you hung around Morningside Heights.
Morningside Heights.
But you had a different name for it.
Well, they called it Morningside Heights, Columbia University, because of political reasons of their own. We lived in what we called White Harlem. It was the west side of Harlem. It was technically, in a manner of speaking, the white area of West Harlem. We had Cuban, Puerto Rican, a lot of Dominican, great number of Dominicans in Manhattan now, and Black Harlem, of course. So we lived in a kind of a mixed area, especially as you got out from the Irish enclave. We lived in a little, I would call it an Irish enclave. One half of that street was white, and the other half of it was black. And there wasn't a lot of hostility. I mean, there were occasional things, and there were attitudes probably that people held privately. I don't know. I never had that in my household. I never had those words and those attitudes expressed. So I didn't have them.
Well, the people in that area, your childhood certainly impressed you. You shared them with all of us. Father Rivera, was he really that lenient? You could actually see the line move at confession.
Yeah. Father, we had about 6 priests in the parish. Father Kelly, Father Ford was the pastor, Father Russell, Father Smith, and some of them came and went, and I don't remember the names. Father Daly and Father Halpern and Father Rivera, who was there primarily because there was starting to be more of a Spanish representation. I don't use words like Latino and Hispanic. I say what we grew up with. They're Spanish people, you know. Spanish heritage. Somewhere in their mixed blood there's Spain. So I call them Spanish people. Father Rivera was there to serve them. And Father Rivera didn't understand. I mean, he understood English, but he didn't sound like he understood English. and we would go to Father Rivera because he was notoriously, or that's probably not the right word, he was famously more lenient. he didn't question you. Some of the priests, they would question, so how did you touch yourself? How did you touch yourself, son? He didn't go into any of that, how I touched myself.
No, you just started.
He didn't want that.
You just started doing a voice. You used to sit around with a tape recorder and record these voices, didn't you?
Well, this was a turning point in my life, and it's one that people should know. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for coming. You look pretty good for an old fart.
Well, first time I've done makeup for radio. Old fart is...
Oh, I forgot. You're not an old fart. You're...
an old fuck.
Yeah, right.
I'm an old fuck. It's kind of like a fat fuck, tall fuck, the skinny fuck, short fuck, So it's not old man, it's not old fart, which is kind of like... It's old fuck, In this respect, fuck is a synonym for the word fellow.
Well, you look pretty good for an old fellow.
Well, I feel pretty good for a 69-year-old guy. Yep.
Now, 50 years in show business, when I was doing some research, I thought, how often do you speak to somebody who's worked with Ed Sullivan and Keanu Reeves? That's quite a... Who's more fun, by the way?
Keanu is really fun on the set with Alex Winter. I was in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with the two of them. And then the sequel, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Right.
Yeah, they were a lot of fun. They're very strange, but well, they would never calm down until they call for action on a shot. They would clown and kid around and play grab ass and everything right up until the last second, and then it would be like and action, and suddenly they would be in the scene. And it threw me because I was trying to be an actor, I was trying to be serious about what I had to do.
Right.
And I'd have to just stand there and kind of like keep my mind on my first line, because I'm not a trained actor.
Well, we'll talk about your movie career, and we're going to invite
people.
Such
as it is.
Yes. Invite people up for questions throughout this whole thing.
Good.
But I do want to go back to what started this whole thing.
Right.
You were born in New York.
That started it.
Now, your mother made a rather important decision when you were just a baby to
Leave
raise...
my dad?
Yeah.
He was a drinker, and he was a very successful advertising salesman in newspapers, selling space. And he was an accomplished public speaker, after dinner speaker they called him. And he was a drinker and a bit of a bully. He never did beat her or touch her or anything like that, but he kind of terrorized her and was abusive to my brother. So she didn't want that happening to me. And when I was 2 months old and my brother was 5 years old, she took us out the fire escape window in her father's apartment in New York. I in her arms and my brother at her hand, down the fire escape into the backyard, through the backyards out to Broadway, and into my uncle's Packard, and drove us off to the country, and she never looked back. Then she got back into business in advertising and raised 2 boys during the Depression and the Second World War. So she did quite a job.
Your mom's been quite an influence on you, hasn't she?
Yeah, well, she was the sole parent, of course, and she was absent because she had to work. So I did a lot of parenting to myself. I engaged in a lot of mental activity to kind of fill the void which children will do, and I had radio to listen to. She was very conscious of language, as was her father. Her father, a New York City policeman, my grandpa, whom I never knew. I never knew any of the grandparents. I never knew my father either. I had the one parent in my experience. And my grandfather was a cop in New York, 20 years, around, way back, because they were all rather old when their kids were born. So as a result, this was in the 1890s. And, he wrote out, my grandfather, many of the works of Shakespeare longhand, during his lifetime because of the joy it gave him. That was the explanation he had. Wow. So that's an indication of the language. I sang Mañana in her class. Mañana, mañana, mañana is soon enough for me. And, some of the guys thought it was goofy, and some of them liked it. But in Sister Nina's class, we were assigned to write an autobiography. I think 5th grade is about time to look back on your life. So, part of the autobiography was the last page, and that page was what I'm going to be. And I said, I want to be either actor, comedian, imitator, announcer, or something like that. So there it was, right in front of everyone. And there was a nice amalgam. You can tell the thing I wanted most was attention. That was really that sentence was all about, A&Q with me.
Well, you went to the Army.
Of course, yeah.
Air Force, sorry.
And I wanted to be this announcer. My plan was to go in the Air Force, do 4 years from 17 to 21, get out at the age of 21, and use the GI Bill to go to school to learn to be an announcer and a disc jockey, so that I would be learning when I was 21. Now, I got in there, and when I was 18, I was in an amateur play downtown in Shreveport, in a very good community theater company, by the way, Shreveport Little Theater. And I was doing, and it was Monroe. And Joe Monroe was famous as a radio personality in Shreveport. I was out on the base. I was in the Air Force out on the base. And in my off time, I would do this play. And Joe was a famous radio personality. He did the morning show. He did the afternoon drive time. And I didn't know he owned the station. So it was a really great station, KJOE, K-J-O-E in Shreveport.
That wasn't the clue?
Yeah. Well, maybe there was a slight inkling in my mind, but I didn't know that he was the outright owner. Actually, he was 51%. That station was #1 in a 9-station market, in spite of the fact that it was a daytime-only station. They had to come on the air every morning again at sunrise, turn the transmitter on, and gain back all the listeners who had tuned out at sundown. There are some stations of low power. This was a 1,000 watts, and daytime only, but it was #1, and it had about a 50% share of the market. But the way the mechanics of the thing happened, I was in this play, and Joe Monroe was in it, so I said to Joe, hey, Joe, I wonder if I could come down and watch you do your radio show, because I'm going to be a disc jockey when I get out of the Air Force. And that was my first step, being on the risk, so I didn't bother telling about comedian and all that. I'm going to be a disc jockey, and I'd like to watch your show and pick up some tips and see how you do it. He said, yeah. He says, come on down. I still didn't know he was the owner. I got there and watched his show, and he went off the air at sundown. Let's say it was 6:15 that night. It changes. It gets later and later as the summer goes on. And when the show was over and the station was off the air, he said, go on in the control room there. I'll stay here at the board. Go in the control room there and the announcer's booth room and read some of this news copy and read a couple of these local commercials. So I brought him in there and I read them in my best assumed announcer voice. I was 18. I still had my New York, I had a non-regional accent that I had been kind of cultivating since I had the tape recorder, but it wasn't perfect. I still had some New York vowels that gave me away. But I read for him, and he liked it well enough that he gave me a job on the spot, starting me at, it was 60 cents an hour, which he knew cheap labor when he saw it. 60 cents, but I forgot I was in the Air Force. I was eating free and sleeping free and getting a little money too. So it was fine with me. I would have worked free, obviously. The job was weekends only, Saturday and Sunday, reading the newscast, the ones that were not sponsored. The sustaining newscast. It was either for the U.S. bonds or join the Navy or some kind of, drive carefully, those kind of things. So I learned the weekends reading those newscasts, how to read on the air and everything. And pretty soon, like a news spot where they played nicer music. It wasn't top 40. They played kind of like nice music, musician action. That's how it all began for me. I saved all that time. When I got out of the Air Force, and I got kicked out a year early.
I was going to say, you keep saying when I got out of the Air Force, but the fact is, you were kicked out of